at Millie, the pills still in my hand, wondering if I've heard her correctly. Millie, we can't. Yes, can. Have to. She nods her head determinedly. George Cooney, bad man. Frightened of where the conversation is going and conscious of Jack waiting, I fold the pills back into the tissue. I think we should flush these down the loo, Millie. No! We can't do anything bad, Millie, I say. George Cooney do bad thing, she says darkly. George Cooney, bad man. Very bad man. Yes, I know. A frown furrows her brow. But I come live with Grace soon. Yes, that's right. You are coming to live with me soon. But I not live with bad man. I scared. So we kill bad man. We kill George Cooney. I'm sorry, Millie. We can't kill anybody. Agatha Christie kill people, she says indignantly. In and then there were none. Lots of people die. And Mrs. Rogers, she died from sleeping medicine. Maybe she does, I say firmly. But they're just stories, Millie. You know that. Yet even while I'm telling her that we can't, my mind races on ahead, wondering if there are enough pills to at least knock Jack out long enough for me to escape. Common sense tells me that even if there are enough, the chances of being able to get them into him are almost negligible. But despite what I've just told Millie, I know I'll never be able to flush them down the toilet because they represent the first glimmer of hope I've had in a long time. But I also know that whatever I decide to do with them, if anything, Millie can't be involved. I'm going to flush the pills anyway, I tell her, walking into one of the cubicles. As I flush the chain, I quickly stuff the tissue up into my sleeve, but immediately panic when I realise that Jack will see the bulge and ask what it is. Fishing it back out, I look up and down my person, wondering where I can hide it. I can't put it in my bag because Jack always checks it before I put it away, and hiding it down my bra or knickers is out because he always watches me undress. Stooping, I slip the scrunched-up tissue into my shoe, wedging it firmly into the toe. It's difficult to get my shoe back on, and I know it's going to be even more uncomfortable once I start walking, but I feel safer with the pills hidden there than on my body. I have no idea how I'm going to be able to get them out of my shoe if a time comes when I feel I can use them, but just knowing that they are there gives me comfort. Grace stupid, Millie says furiously as I come back out. Can't kill George Cooney now. That's right, Millie, we can't, I agree. But he bad man. Yes, but we can't kill bad men, I point out. It's against the law. Then tell police, George Cooney bad man. That's a good idea, Millie, I say, seeking to soothe her agitation. I'll tell the police. Now! No, not now, but soon. Before I come live with you. Yes, before you come to live with me. You tell police? I take her hand in mine. Do you trust me, Millie? She nods reluctantly. Then I promise I'll find a solution before you come to live with me. Promise? Yes, I promise, I tell her, fighting back tears. And now you must promise me something. You must promise that you'll continue to keep our secret. I like Jack, but I don't like George Cooney, she intones, still upset with me. Yes, that's right, Millie. Now, let's go back out and see Jack. Maybe he'll buy us an ice cream. But even the thought of an ice cream, one of Millie's favourite things, isn't enough to lift her spirits. When I think about how proud and excited she'd been when she handed me the carefully wrapped pills, how clever she'd been to find a solution to the desperate situation we're in, I hate that I can't tell her how amazing she is. But despite the surge of hope I'd felt when I placed the pills in the toe of my shoe, I don't see how I'll be able to use them. The walk to the nearby park and the ice cream van that is parked there is so uncomfortable because of my squashed toes that I know I'm not going to be able to spend the next 3 hours walking round. Millie is so downcast, I'm worried Jack will guess that something transpired between us during our time in the toilets and start asking questions that she won't know how to answer. In an effort to distract her, I ask her which flavour ice cream she's going to choose, and when she shrugs unenthusiastically, Jack's appraising look tells me that even if he hadn't noticed before, her change of spirits has now caught his attention. Looking for a way to distract him and to brighten Millie's mood, I suggest going to the cinema, which will also get me off my feet. "Would you like that?" Jack asks, turning to Millie. "Yes," she says unenthusiastically. "Then we'll go. But first, Millie, I want to know what happened in the toilet." "What you mean?" Caught off guard, Millie is defensive. "Just that you were happy when you went into the toilet and miserable when you came out," he says reasonably. "I have period." "You knew that before you went in. Come on, Millie. Tell me what happened to upset you." His voice is encouraging, coaxing, and sensing Millie hesitate, I feel a prickle of fear. It's not that I think she's suddenly going to blurt out to Jack about the pills, but he's so good at manipulating people I'd be stupid not to be afraid, and in the mood she's in, Millie is more likely to let her guard down. As well as that, she's angry with me. I turn my head towards her, hoping to be able to warn her with my eyes to be careful, but she refuses to look at me. "Can't." Millie shakes her head. "Why not?" "It's secret." "I'm afraid you're not allowed to have secrets," Jack says regretfully. "So why don't you tell me? Did Grace say something to upset you? You can tell me, Millie. In fact, you have to tell me." "She say no," she says, shrugging. "No?" "Yes." "I see. And what did Grace say no to?" "I tell her, kill George Cooney, and she say no," she says darkly. "Very funny, Millie." "It's true." "The thing is, Millie, even if it is, I don't believe that's why you're in a bad mood. I know you don't like George Clooney, but you're not stupid, and you know very well that Grace can't kill him. So I'll ask you again. What did Grace say that upset you?" I cast around quickly for something that sounds genuine. "If you must know, Jack, she asked if she could come and see the house, and I said no," I say, sounding exasperated. He turns towards me, understanding exactly why I want to keep Millie away from the house. "Is that so?" he says. "Want to see my bedroom," Millie confirms, looking at me to show she has understood what I want her to say. "Then so you shall," Jack says with a flourish, as if he is granting her a wish. "You're right, Millie. You should be allowed to see your room. In fact, you'll probably love it so much you might ask to move in with us at once rather than go back to school. Don't you think that might be the case, Grace?" "Is yellow?" Millie asks. "Of course it is." Jack smiles. "Come on, let's go to the cinema. I've got quite a bit of thinking to do." At the cinema, I sit in the darkness, glad that nobody can see the tears that spring to my eyes when I realise how reckless I've been. In telling Jack that Millie had asked to see her room, because I couldn't think of anything else to say, I may have brought the danger that is awaiting her even nearer. After what she told me in the toilets about not wanting to live with Jack, I doubt she would ask to move in with us sooner than later, as Jack had suggested she might. But what if Jack suggests it himself? After the remark he made last night about being tired of waiting, I wouldn't put it past him. And what reason would there be to say no? What excuse could I come up with to keep Millie safely at school? Even if I found one, Jack would never back me up. I steal a glance at him, hoping to find him absorbed in the film or asleep, but the look of quiet satisfaction on his face tells me he's already realised that inviting Millie to the house might be to his advantage. The knowledge that I've set something that is potentially dangerous to Millie in motion horrifies me, as does knowing that I have no way to stop it. Just as the hopelessness of my situation threatens to overwhelm me, Millie, seated on the other side of Jack, bursts out laughing at something on the screen, and I know that I have to save her, at whatever cost to myself, from the horror Jack has in store for her. The film over, we drive back to the school to drop Millie off. Janice is already there, and as we say goodbye, she asks us if we'll be coming back the following Sunday. Actually, we thought we'd bring Millie down to the house instead, Jack says smoothly. It's about time she saw where she's going to be living. Don't you think so, darling? I thought you wanted to wait until all the work had been completed, I point out, trying to keep my voice steady, appalled that he has made his move so quickly. It will be by the weekend. You said my bedroom not finished, Millie says accusingly. I was joking, Jack explains patiently. I wanted your visit to us next weekend to be a surprise. So, how about we pick you up at 11 o'clock and drive you down? Would you like that? Millie hesitates, unsure of what she's meant to say. Yes, I like, she says slowly. I like to see house. And your bedroom, Jack reminds her, is yellow, Millie says, turning to Janice. I have yellow bedroom. Well, you'll be able to tell me all about it when you get back, Janice tells her. The fear that Millie might not get back, that Jack will invent a broken-down car to keep her with us, or simply tell Janice and Mrs. Goodrich that she has asked to stay on with us, makes it difficult for me to think straight. Aware of how little time I have to act, my mind races, looking for a way, not of stopping the ball from rolling, because it's too late for that, but of diverting it from its path. Why don't you come too? I hear myself say to Janice. Then you can see Millie's bedroom for yourself. Millie claps her hands in delight. Janice, come too! Jack frowns. I'm sure Janice has better things to do with her weekend. Janice shakes her head. No, it's fine. In fact, I would love to see where Millie's going to live. Then, could I ask you to bring her down? I ask hurriedly before Jack can dream up a reason for Janice not to come. Of course I will. It'd be silly for you and Mr. Angel to drive all the way here only to go back again. It's the least I can do. If you just give me your address... I'll write it down for you, Jack says. Do you have a pen? Not on me, I'm afraid. Janice looks at my bag. Do you have one? I don't even pretend to look. Sorry, I say apologetically. No problem. I'll just pop in and get one. She leaves. Painfully aware of Jack's eyes boring into me, I'm unable to answer the questions Millie fires excitedly at me about her forthcoming visit to our house. His fury at the way I've invited Janice along is tangible, and I know I'm going to have to come up with an excellent and believable reason as to why I did. But if Janice brings Millie down, there is the unspoken assumption that she'll be going back with her, and therefore less chance for Jack to manipulate things so that she ends up staying on with us. Janice returns with pen and paper, and Jack writes down our address and hands it to her. She folds the paper and puts it in her pocket and, maybe because she's used to us cancelling things at the last minute, confirms that the invitation is for the following Sunday, the 2nd of May. When I hear the date, something occurs to me and I find myself grabbing at it with both hands. I've just had a thought. Why don't we make it the Sunday after instead? Millie's face falls and I turn to her quickly. Then we'll be able to celebrate your 18th birthday at the same time. It's on the 10th, I remind her. Would you like that, Millie? Would you like a party in your new house? With cake, she asks. And balloons. With cake, candles, balloons, everything, I say, hugging her. What a lovely idea, exclaims Janice as Millie squeals in delight. It will also give us time to get the house completely finished, I add, thrilled at the way I've managed to buy myself more time. What do you think, Jack? I think it's an excellent idea, he says. How very clever of you to have thought of it. Now, shall we go? It's getting late and there's something we need to do tonight, isn't there, darling? Dread replaces the joy I felt only minutes before at having outsmarted him, as he can only be referring to one thing. Not wanting him to see how much his words have affected me, I turn and kiss Millie goodbye. We'll see you next Sunday, I tell her, despite knowing that Jack will never allow me to come in view of my invitation to Janice. Meanwhile, I'll start getting things ready for your party. Is there anything special you'd like? Big cake, she laughs. Very big cake. I'll make sure Grace makes you the most beautiful cake in the world, Jack promises. I like you, Jack, she beams. But you don't like George Clooney, he finishes. He turns to Janice. In fact, she dislikes him so much that she asked Grace to kill him. Not funny, Millie, Janice frowns. She was joking with you, Jack, I say calmly, knowing that he understands just how much Millie hates being reprimanded. Still, you shouldn't joke about things like that. Janice is firm. Do you understand, Millie? I wouldn't like to have to tell Mrs. Goodrich. I'm sorry, says Millie, her face crestfallen. I think you've been listening to too many Agatha Christie stories, Janice goes on sternly. No more for a week, I'm afraid. I shouldn't have said anything, says Jack contritely, as tears well up in Millie's eyes. I didn't mean to get her into trouble. I bite back the angry retort that springs to my lips, surprised that I had even thought of contradicting him. It's something I stopped doing long ago, especially in public. Well, we really must be off, I say to Janice instead. I give Millie a last hug. You can think about what dress you'd like to wear to the party and tell me when I see you next week, I tell her, hoping to cheer her up. What time would you like us to arrive on the 9th? Janice asks. Around 1, I say, looking at Jack for confirmation. He shakes his head. The earlier the better, I think. Besides, I can't wait to show Millie her room. So, why don't we say 12:30? Lovely. Janice smiles. In the car on the way home, I brace myself for whatever is to come. Jack doesn't say anything for a while, perhaps because he knows that the anticipation of his anger is sometimes, but not always, worse than the event. I tell myself that I can't afford to let fear muddle my thinking, and concentrate instead on finding a way of deflecting his fury. The best way, I decide, is to make him think I've given up, that there is no hope left, and I take comfort from the thought that my lethargy over the last few months, which I'd been berating myself for, might actually have served me well, as a slide into total apathy won't seem so contrived. I hope you realise that you've made everything much worse for yourself by inviting Janice along, he says, when he feels he's let me sweat enough. The reason I invited Janice along is so that she'll be able to report back to Mrs. Goodrich that our beautiful house is perfect for Millie, I say tiredly. Do you honestly think that the school where Millie has lived for the last 7 years is going to wave goodbye to her without checking up on where she's going? He nods approvingly. That's very noble of you. But now I have to ask myself why you should choose to be noble, given the circumstances. Because I suppose I've accepted that there's nothing I can do to prevent the inevitable, I say quietly. I think I realised it long ago, actually. I let a sob choke my voice. For a while, I honestly thought that I would be able to find a way out, and I tried. I tried so hard. But you've always been one step ahead of me. I'm glad you've realised it, he says, although I must admit that I've missed your futile attempts to escape from me. They were amusing, if nothing else. The small glow of satisfaction I feel at having outmanoeuvred Jack is precious. It gives me the confidence that I can do it again, and I can turn a bad situation around and turn a negative into a positive. I don't quite know where I'm going to find the positive in Millie coming to the house for lunch, but at least it is only lunch. Her inevitable delight when she sees the house will be hard enough to bear during the few hours she'll spend with us. To have to endure it for any longer, when I know what Jack has in store for her, and when I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the solution that I promised her, is unimaginable. My throbbing toes make me want to ease my shoe off, but I don't dare for fear I won't be able to slip it back on easily when we arrive at the house. In the light of her imminent visit, the pills Millie gave me take on a new importance. I had planned to leave them safely tucked into the toe of my shoe until the time came when I could use them, but I no longer have time for such luxuries. If I am ever to use them, I need to get them into my bedroom, where they will be more easily accessible. But with Jack watching my every move, it's going to be almost impossible. I use the rest of the journey to consider what I can do. The only way the pills are going to be of any use to me is if I manage to get enough of them into Jack to render him unconscious. But if getting them into my bedroom seems impossible, administering them to him seems even more so. I tell myself that I can't afford to look that far ahead, that all I can do is take one step at a time and concentrate instead on the present. We arrive at the house, and as we're taking off our coats, the phone starts ringing. Jack answers it, as he always does, while I wait obediently, as I always do. It would be no use me carrying on up the stairs to try to take the pills from my shoe, because Jack would simply follow me. "She's fine today, thank you, Esther," I hear him say, and after a moment of puzzlement, the events of the previous evening come flooding back, and I realise Esther is phoning to see how I am. He pauses a moment. "Yes, we've just walked in the door, actually. We took Millie out for lunch." Another pause. "I'll tell Grace you called." "Oh, of course. I'll pass her to you." I don't show my surprise when Jack hands me the phone, but the fact is, I am surprised, as he normally tells anyone who asks to speak to me that I'm unavailable. But I suppose that, as he's told Esther we've just walked in the door, he could hardly say that I was in the shower or asleep in bed. "Hello, Esther," I say cautiously. "I know you've just got in, so I won't keep you long, but I wanted to see how you are, after last night." "I'm fine, thank you," I tell her. "Much better. My sister had a miscarriage before having her first child, so I know how emotionally draining it can be," she goes on. "Even so, I wish I hadn't inflicted my disappointment on all of you," I say, aware of Jack listening to what I'm saying. "It's just that it was hard hearing about Diane's pregnancy." "Of course, it must have been," Esther sympathises. "And I hope you know that if you ever need anyone to talk to, I'm here." "Thank you," I say. "That's kind of you." "So, how was Millie?" she asks, obviously eager to add a bit of cement to our growing friendship. Ever wary of her inquisitive streak, I'm just about to wind up the conversation with, "She was fine, thank you for calling. I'm afraid I have to go, Jack's waiting for dinner," when I decide to keep talking, as I would if I was living a normal life. "Very excited," I smile. "Her carer, Janice, is bringing her down for lunch the Sunday after next, so that she can see the house at last. She'll be 18 on the Monday, so we'll be having a little celebration for her." "How lovely," Esther enthuses. "I hope you'll let me bring around a card for her." I'm about to tell her that we would prefer it to be just the four of us this time, but that she'll be welcome to meet Millie once she's moved in, when it dawns on me that she will never get to see Millie. If everything goes as Jack wants, she will have to be kept out of sight, because how could he let anyone see her when he intends to keep her prisoner? And when he could no longer stall the people who ask where Millie is with pretend illnesses, he will say it didn't work out, that Millie was too institutionalized to adapt to living with us and, as a result, has moved into a wonderful new home at the other end of the country. From being out of sight, Millie will quickly pass to being out of mind, and I realise that the more people who meet Millie, the harder it will be to keep her hidden away. But I need to be careful. That's very kind of you, I say, making sure to sound hesitant. And you're right. Millie really should have a proper party for such an important birthday. I know she'll love to meet your children. Goodness, I certainly didn't mean to suggest that you should be giving Millie a party, or that you should invite Sebastian and Aisling along, Esther exclaims, sounding embarrassed. I just meant I would pop in quickly by myself with a card. Why not? Diane and Adam have always wanted to meet Millie. Honestly, Grace, I don't think any of us would want to intrude. Esther sounds more confused than ever. Not at all. It's a very good idea. Shall we say 3 o'clock? That'll allow me and Jack to have lunch with Millie and Janice first. Well, if you're sure, says Esther doubtfully. Yes, it will be lovely for Millie, I say, nodding. I'll see you on the 9th then. I look forward to it. Goodbye, Esther. Thank you for phoning. I put the phone down, steeling myself. What the hell was all that about? Jack explodes. Have you really just invited Esther to some sort of birthday party for Millie? No, Jack, I say wearily. Esther decided that we should give Millie a proper party and then invited herself and the children along. You know what she's like. She almost ordered me to invite Diane and Adam along as well. Why didn't you refuse? Because that kind of role doesn't come easily to me anymore. I'm too used to being perfect, to saying the right thing, just as you wanted me to do. But if you want to go ahead and uninvite them, please do. Our friends may as well get used to the fact that they're never going to meet Millie. Didn't Moira and Giles say they couldn't wait to see her? What excuse are you going to give to them, Jack? I thought I'd tell them that your parents suddenly realised how much they missed their beautiful daughter and that she's gone to live with them in New Zealand, he says. Horrified at exactly how much he intended Millie to be out of sight and mind, I'm determined that the party for Millie will go ahead. And what if my parents decide to come over for Christmas? I ask. What will you do if they turn up here expecting to see Millie? I doubt very much that they will. And anyway, maybe she'll have given up and died before then, although I hope not. It would be most inconvenient if she only managed to last a few months after all the trouble I've gone to. I turn away abruptly so he can't see the way the colour has drained from my face. And the only thing that stops my legs from giving way beneath me is the murderous rage that has filled my heart. I clench my fists and, noticing, he laughs. You would just love to kill me, wouldn't you? Eventually, yes. But first I'd like to see you suffer, I tell him, unable to help myself. Not much chance of that, I'm afraid, he says, seeming amused by the thought. I know I have to keep focused. That the chances of Millie being a flesh and blood person to our friends rather than someone they only know about second-hand are slipping away fast. I also know that if Jack suspects I want the party to go ahead, he'll phone Esther back and tell her that we prefer it to be a private gathering. Just cancel the party, Jack, I say, sounding as if I'm close to tears. There's no way I could sit through it and pretend that everything is fine. Then it's the perfect punishment for inviting Janice in the first place. Please, Jack. No, I plead. Oh, I do so love it when you beg, he sighs, especially as it has the opposite effect that it's meant to. Now, up to your room. I have a party to prepare for. Maybe it's not such a bad idea after all. At least once people have actually met Millie, they'll be even more impressed by my generosity. I let my shoulders slump and drag my feet as I walk up the stairs in front of him, in what I hope is a perfect picture of dejection. In the dressing room, I take off my clothes slowly, while my mind looks for a way to distract him so that I can take the pills from my shoe and hide them somewhere on me. So, have you told the neighbours that as well as having a manic-depressive wife, you have a mentally retarded sister-in-law? I ask, slipping off my shoes and beginning to undress. Why would I have? They're never going to meet Millie. I hang my dress back up in the wardrobe and take my pyjamas from the shelf. But they'll see her in the garden when she's having her party, I say, putting them on. They can't see into our garden from their house, he points out. I reach for the shoebox. They can if they're standing at the window on the first floor. Which window? The one that overlooks the garden. I nod towards the window. That one over there. As he turns his head, I crouch down, place the shoebox on the floor and pick up my shoes. He cranes his neck. They wouldn't be able to see from there, he says, as I prise the tissue from my shoe. It's too far away. Still crouching, I tuck the tissue into the waistband of my pyjamas, place the shoes in the box, and stand up. Then you've got nothing to worry about, I say, putting the box back in the wardrobe. I walk towards the door, praying that the tissue won't slip from its hiding place and spill pills all over the floor. Jack follows me out, and I open my bedroom door and go in, half expecting Jack to pull me back and demand to know what I've stuffed into my waistband. As he closes the door behind me, I don't dare believe that I've actually managed to pull it off. But when I hear the key turning in the lock, the relief is so great that my legs give way and I sink to the floor, my whole body trembling. But because there's always the possibility that Jack is only letting me think I've got away with it, I get to my feet and slide the tissue under the mattress. Then I sit down on the bed and try to take in the fact that I've achieved more in the last 15 minutes than I have in the last 15 months, acknowledging all the while that if I have, it's thanks to Millie. I'm not shocked that she expected me to kill Jack, because murder is commonplace in the detective stories she listens to, and she has no real idea of what it means to actually kill someone. In her mind, where the line between fact and fiction is often blurred, murder is simply a solution to a problem. Past. That first time, I was ashamed of the way I clung to Jack when he finally came to let me out of the room in the basement. It had been a long, terrible night, made worse by the knowledge that I had helped make it the nightmare it was. Until then, I'd had no real idea what he intended for Millie. I knew that fear would be a part of it, but I had been confident that I would be able to protect her from the worst of it, that she would be able to run to me, that I would be with her at all times. Even though Jack had told me he wanted someone he could hide away, it had never occurred to me that he meant to keep Millie locked up in a terrifying room in the basement, so that he could feed off her fear whenever he wanted. To know the extent of his deprivation was bad enough, but the fear that he would leave me there to die of dehydration, like Molly did, that I might not get out in time to save Millie, broke me. Which was why, when he eventually unlocked the door the next morning, I was almost incoherent with gratitude, promising that I would do anything, as long as he didn't take me down there again. He took me at my word and turned it into a game. He began setting me tasks he knew I would fail, so that he would have an excuse to take me down to the basement. Before I hit him with the bottle, Jack would let me choose the menu for the dinner parties we gave, and I would choose dishes that I'd cooked many times before. From then on, he imposed the menu on me, and made sure the dishes he chose were as complicated as possible. If the meal wasn't perfect, if the meat was a little too tough, or the fish a little overcooked, he would take me down to the room once our guests had gone, and lock me in overnight. I was a fairly confident cook, but under such pressure I made stupid mistakes, so much so that the dinner where Esther and Rufus had been invited was the first time everything had gone smoothly in 5 months. Even when we went to friends for dinner, if I said or did anything that displeased Jack, once I couldn't finish my dessert, I would get taken down to the basement as soon as we got home. Aware that my fear had a potent effect on him, I would try to remain calm, but if I did, he would stand on the other side of the door and, his voice hoarse with excitement, tell me to imagine Millie in there, until I begged him to stop. Present. It's the day of Millie's party. Just as I'm beginning to think that Jack is never going to come and let me into the bedroom next door so that I can get ready, I hear him coming up the stairs. "Party time," he says, throwing open the door. He seems so excited that I wonder what he has up his sleeve, but I can't afford to worry about it. Although I'm happy with the progress I've made over the last 2 weeks, it's important that today, of all days, I keep calm. I go into my old bedroom and open the wardrobe, hoping that Jack will choose something pretty for me to wear in honour of Millie's birthday. The dress Jack picks out for me was already a little too big, so when I put it on, it highlights how thin I am now. I see Jack frowning, but he doesn't tell me to change out of it. I guess it's my appearance in general that concerns him. My face, when I look in the mirror, looks gaunt, making my eyes seem enormous. I put on a little makeup, and when I'm ready, I follow Jack downstairs. He has prepared the lunch we are to have with Millie and Janice, and has had caterers prepare the food for the party this afternoon, rather than allow me to make it, as I had wanted. It all looks perfect. He checks the time on his watch as we go into the hall. He types a code into the keypad on the wall, and the front gates whir open. Minutes later, we hear the sound of a car approaching. Jack walks to the front door and opens it, just as Janice brings her car to a stop. Janice and Millie get out of the car. Millie rushes towards me, wearing a pretty pink dress with a matching ribbon in her hair, while Janice follows at a more leisurely pace, looking around her, taking everything in. "You look lovely, Millie," I tell her, giving her a hug. "Love house, Grace," she cries, her eyes shining. "It is beautiful." "Certainly is," Janice says, admiringly, coming up behind her. She shakes Jack's hand, then mine. Millie turns to Jack. "House beautiful." He gives a gracious bow. "I'm very glad you like it. Why don't we go in and I'll show you around? But perhaps you'd like a drink first. I thought we could have it on the terrace, unless you feel it's too cold." "The terrace will be lovely," says Janice. "We should make the most of this gorgeous weather, especially as it's not going to last." We go through the hall, into the kitchen, and out onto the terrace, where cans of cold drinks and fruit juices are sitting in ice. The glasses are already on the table. There will be no going back inside to fetch them and leaving me alone with Janice and Millie. With so many people joining us this afternoon, Jack is going to have his work cut out keeping an eye on me. We sip our drinks and make polite conversation. Millie doesn't sit still for long. She's far too excited and goes off to explore the garden. We catch up with her while we're showing Janice around. "Would you like to see your bedroom, Millie?" Jack asks. She nods enthusiastically. "Yes, please, Jack." "I hope you're going to like it." "I like yellow," she says happily. The four of us go upstairs, and Jack opens the door to the master bedroom where he sleeps and where, this time, items I have never seen before but which are obviously meant to belong to me, a silk dressing gown, bottles of perfume and some magazines, give the impression that I sleep there too. When Millie shakes her head and tells them that it's not her bedroom, he shows her one of the guest bedrooms, which is decorated in blue and white. "What do you think?" he asks. She hesitates. "He's pretty, but not yellow." He moves on to the room I used to inhabit. "What about this one?" Millie shakes her head. "Don't like green." Jack smiles. "It's just as well it's not your room, then." Janice joins in the game. "Maybe it's over there," she says, pointing to the door further down the landing. Millie runs and opens it and finds a bathroom. "Why don't you try that door?" suggests Jack, pointing to the door to my box room. She does as he says. "It's horrible," she frowns, peering inside. "I not like it." "It is horrible, isn't it?" I agree. "Don't worry, Millie, I'm only teasing," Jack laughs. "There's still one door that you haven't tried, opposite the master bedroom. Why don't you have a look in there?" She runs back down the landing, opens the door, and lets out a squeal of delight. By the time we've caught up with her, she's bouncing up and down on the bed, the skirt of her pink dress billowing around her, and she looks so happy that tears well up inside me. I swallow them down quickly, reminding myself of all that is at stake. "I think she likes it," Jack says, turning to Janice. "Who wouldn't? It's gorgeous." He only gets Millie to leave the room with the promise of lunch. We go downstairs, and on the way to the dining room, where we are to eat, Jack shows Millie and Janice the rest of the house. "What in here?" Millie asks, trying the door to the basement. "Why it locked?" "It leads to the basement," Jack tells her. "What, the basement?" "It's where I like to keep things," he says. "Can I see?" "Not now." He pauses a moment. "But when you come and live with us, I'll be more than happy to show you." It's hard to carry on, but with his hand hard on my back, I don't have much choice. We eat an informal lunch of cold meats and salads, and while we're having coffee, Millie asks if she can explore the garden again, so we carry our cups out onto the terrace. "I hope you approve of the home we've provided for Millie," Jack says, pulling out chairs for us to sit on. "Definitely," Janice nods. "I can see why you wanted to wait until the work was finished before Millie saw the house. It really is marvellous. Must have been a huge undertaking." "Well, it wasn't exactly easy living with building work going on the whole time, but it was worth it, wasn't it, darling?" "Yes," I agree. "Where are we going to have Millie's party? Outside or in?" I had intended to set it up in the dining room, but it's such lovely weather, perhaps we could have it here on the terrace. That way Millie and the other children can play in the garden. "Oh, I didn't realise you'd invited anyone else," Janice exclaims. "We wanted to make it a real celebration for Millie, and we thought it important that she meets our friends," Jack explains. "And although the other children are younger than Millie, I'm hoping they'll treat her as a big sister." He looks at his watch. "We invited them for 3, so would you mind keeping an eye on Millie while Grace and I get everything ready?" Janice nods. "I'll go and get her tidied up a bit. Before you go, I have something for her." Jack calls Millie up from the bottom of the garden. "Millie, if you go into the sitting room, you'll find a big box behind one of the chairs. Do you think you could bring it to me?" She disappears into the house, and I try not to worry about what it is he has for her, telling myself that he wouldn't do anything stupid in front of Janice. Still, I can't help feeling relieved when Millie opens the box and takes out a yellow satin dress with a full skirt and a wide belt. "It's lovely, Jack," I say, hating my gratitude, and when Millie throws her arms around his neck, I feel the same pang of regret that I always feel whenever I'm reminded of how it could have been. "I'm glad you approve." Janice looks at me in surprise. "You didn't help him choose it?" "No, I'm afraid Jack quite took over the preparations for Millie's party, but as you can see, he's perfectly capable of managing on his own." "Why don't you take Millie up to her room and get her changed there?" Jack suggests. "Go on, Millie. Go with Janice." As they leave, he turns to me. "She may as well enjoy it while she can. Somehow, I don't think she's going to like her real bedroom quite as much, do you? Right, time to get the table ready." He extends the already large wooden table to its maximum length so that it will seat everybody, 9 adults and 5 children, without too much trouble. As we move between kitchen and terrace, carrying plates and glasses, I try not to let his reference to Millie's bedroom detract from what I have to do this afternoon. "What do you think?" asks Jack, looking at the table heaving with food. "It's lovely," I say, admiring the banner and balloons he has strung around the terrace. "Millie will love it." As if on cue, she and Janice appear, Millie radiant in her new dress and a ribbon in her hair. "What a beautiful young lady," Jack exclaims, making Millie blush with pleasure. I look at her anxiously, hoping that she isn't going to start being taken in by Jack. "Thank you, Jack." She looks around at everything in awe. "He's beautiful," she breathes. "You look lovely, Millie," I say, going over to her. She throws her arms around my neck. "I not forget he bad man," she whispers in my ear. "You're right, Millie. Jack is a very nice man," I laugh, knowing that Jack will have seen the whisper. She nods in agreement. "Jack nice." The doorbell peals. "Party start," she says delightedly. Jack takes my hand in a gesture that is anything but affectionate, and we go to open the door, leaving Janice and Millie on the terrace. We usher Esther and Rufus and their 2 children through the kitchen and make the necessary introductions. They've just finished telling Millie how pretty she looks when Moira and Giles arrive, followed soon after by Diane, Adam and their children. "We heard you out here, so we didn't bother ringing at the door," Diane explains, kissing me. There are so many people for Jack to greet, so many introductions to be made, that he has no option but to take his eyes off me. And it occurs to me that I have ample time to whisper, "Help me, Jack's a maniac," into Diane's ear. But even with the note of urgency in my voice, she would think I was joking, or referring to the obvious expense Jack has gone to give Millie a perfect party. He takes me with him into the kitchen to fetch champagne for the adults and colourful drinks for the children, and when I sit down at the table, the pressure of his hand in mine warns me that he is listening to everything I say, whilst making conversation of his own, as only he can. Millie begins to open her presents. I've no idea what we've bought Millie, as I didn't dare ask in case I upset the relative calm I've managed to achieve over the last 2 weeks. As usual, Jack has come up trumps, buying her a pretty silver locket engraved with an M. "Pretty!" Millie beams, holding it up so everyone can see it. "It's actually from me, because Grace has her own special present for you," Jack says. Millie looks at me questioningly, and I smile back at her, hoping he's chosen something nice. "She's done some lovely paintings for your new bedroom, haven't you, darling?" I feel the colour wash from my face and grip the edge of the table hard. Millie claps her hands excitedly. "I can see?" "Not just yet," Jack says apologetically. But they'll be hanging in your room by the time you move in, I promise. What sort of paintings are they? Rufus asks. Portraits, Jack tells him, and very realistic ones at that. Grace has a wonderful eye for detail. Are you all right, Grace? Esther looks at me in concern. The heat, I manage. I'm not used to it. Jack hands me a glass of water. Have a drink, darling, he says solicitously. It'll make you feel better. Aware of Millie looking at me anxiously, I take a sip of water. That's better, I tell her. Open your other presents, then you can play some games. There's a silver bangle from Moira and Giles, and a silver trinket box from Diane and Adam, but I barely see them because it's an effort to keep myself together. I sense Esther looking curiously at me, but for once I don't care that she's seen I'm upset. Esther, aren't you going to give Millie our present? Rufus asks. Of course. Esther rallies herself and hands Millie a beautifully wrapped present. I hope you like it. She smiles, smiling at her. Millie opens it and finds a large red velvet box, its lid prettily decorated with sequins and glass beads. It's exactly the sort of thing that Millie loves, and as she gasps in delight, I take a grip on myself and smile gratefully across at Esther. It's to keep things in, Esther tells her. I bought it to match your new bedroom. Millie beams at her. It's yellow, she says proudly. My bedroom is yellow. Esther looks puzzled. It's red, isn't it? Millie shakes her head. Yellow. It's my favourite colour. I thought your favourite colour was red. Yellow. Esther turns to Jack. Didn't you say that you were decorating Millie's bedroom red because it was her favourite colour? No, I don't think so. Yes, Jack, you did, Diane confirms. At least, that's what you told us that time you gate-crashed our lunch in town. Well, if I did, I'm very sorry. I must have been thinking of something else at the time. But you said it on more than one occasion, Esther insists. When you came to dinner at ours, you said that you couldn't wait for Millie to see her red bedroom. She looks over at me. Isn't that what he said, Grace? I'm afraid I don't remember. I mumble. Does it really matter? Jack nods at Millie, who is busy putting her other presents into the box. Look, she loves it. But it's strange to have made the same mistake twice, Esther says, genuinely puzzled. I wasn't aware that I had. Well, I could take it back and change it for a yellow one, I suppose, she says doubtfully. Please don't, I tell her. Jack's right. Millie loves it. For the next 10 minutes, I watch her watching Jack, and I'm glad that in his efforts to destabilise me, he has overplayed his hand. Not that anyone except Esther seems to have noticed. At one moment, she looks from Jack to the red box, a frown on her face. Suddenly, she turns her attention back to me. I hope you don't mind me asking, Grace, she says. But are you sure you're all right? You look very pale. Oh, I'm fine, I reassure her. I've noticed it too, Diane nods. And you've lost weight. You haven't been dieting, have you? No, it's just that I don't seem to have much appetite at the moment. Maybe you should go and see a doctor. I will, I promise. You really need to take more care of her, Jack. Esther looks at him appraisingly. I intend to. Smiling, he slips his hand into the inside pocket of his jacket and draws out an envelope. I didn't see why Millie should be the only one to have a present today. Adam, please take note, Diane groans. Here we are, darling. Jack hands me the envelope. Open it. I do as he says, and find myself looking at a pair of plane tickets. Come on, Grace. Don't keep us in suspense, Diane implores. Where's Jack taking you? Thailand, I say slowly, horribly aware that everything I've managed to put in place since Millie gave me the pills will all have been for nothing if we go away. What a lucky girl, says Moira, smiling at me. I think you meant to say something, Grace, Esther prompts. I raise my head quickly. It's such a shock. I mean, well, it's a lovely thought, Jack, but do we really have time to go away? You did say that you wanted one last holiday in Thailand before Millie comes to live with us, he reminds me, making it sound as if I think of Millie as some sort of burden. But you said we wouldn't be able to. Didn't you say that you had the Tomasin case coming up? Yes, but I'm working hard to make sure it'll be over by then. When are you going? Giles asks. I've booked tickets for the 5th of June. Adam looks at him in surprise. Will the Tomasin case be finished so soon? I hope so. It's going to court next week. Well, even so, I mean, it's not so clear-cut this time, is it? From what the papers are saying, her husband is squeaky clean. Jack raises his eyebrows. Don't tell me you believe what you read in the papers. No, but the theory that it's a set-up and that she's out to frame her husband because she has a lover is an interesting one. It's also total fabrication. So you're confident of winning? Absolutely. I've never lost a case yet, and I don't intend to start now. Adam turns to me. What do you think, Grace? You must have read the papers. Me? I think the husband is as guilty as hell, I say, wondering what they would say if they knew that I barely know what they're talking about. Sorry, but I can't imagine him as a wife-beater, says Diane. He just doesn't look the type. Jack tells me they're the worst kind, I say lightly. Esther's eyes flicker towards me. Must be exciting, having a husband who deals with such high-profile cases, she says, holding my gaze. Actually, Jack rarely talks about his work when he comes home, and especially not the details of his cases, for reasons of client confidentiality. I'm sure it's the same for you, Diane. I turn to Jack with pretended anxiousness. But to get back to our holiday, wouldn't it be better to postpone it until Millie can come with us? Why? Well, if there's a risk that your case might not be over in time. It will be. But what if it isn't? I insist. Then you'll go on ahead and I'll join you. I stare at him. We're not cancelling the holiday, Grace. As everybody has pointed out, you need a rest. You'd really let me go on ahead without you, I say, knowing he would never allow such a thing. Of course. Esther looks at him approvingly. That's very generous of you, Jack. Not at all. I mean, why would I deprive my beautiful wife of a holiday just because I can't go? I'd be more than happy to keep her company until you arrive, Diane offers. Sorry to disappoint you, but I have no intention of not being able to make it, Jack tells her, getting to his feet. Grace, I need your help in the kitchen, darling. I follow him in, stunned at how wrong everything seems to be going. You don't seem to be very keen to go to Thailand, he says, handing me candles to stick in the cake. Yet you were the one who suggested it. But it's just that it doesn't seem such a good idea with your court case coming up. So you think it would be better for me to cancel it? Blessed relief floods through me. Definitely. Then do you think Millie will be able to move in with us earlier? Next week, for example. In fact, she could even stay behind today, and I could drive up and collect her things during the week while she settles into her lovely red bedroom. What do you think, Grace? Shall I go out and suggest it? Or shall we go to Thailand next month? We'll go to Thailand next month, I say stonily. I thought that's what you would say. Now, where are the matches? It's hard not to give in to the desperation I feel as I sing Happy Birthday along with the others and applaud as Millie blows out her candles. I look around at everybody laughing and joking together and struggle to understand how my life has become a living hell that nobody present could ever begin to imagine. If I were to suddenly demand their attention and tell them that Milly is in great danger from Jack, that he intends to keep her locked up in a terrifying room until she goes mad with fear, that he is in reality a murderer who has kept me prisoner for the last 15 months, nobody would believe me. And what would Jack tell them in return? That he only realised once we were married that I had a history of mental illness. That it only became apparent on our honeymoon, when I accused him of keeping me a prisoner in front of a lobby full of people, that the hotel manager, our local doctor, and the police would be happy to confirm that I am unbalanced. That the last 15 months have been a terrible strain on him, especially as he has to accompany me everywhere for fear of what I'll say in public. Even if Milly were to come to my defence and accuse him of pushing her down the stairs, he would look appalled and say that I must have put the idea into her mind. Why would the people gathered here today believe my version over Jack's, when his sounds so much more plausible? We eat the cake, drink more champagne. Milly and the children resume their games, and the rest of us sit around chatting. I have trouble concentrating, but when I hear Janice saying that she'll enjoy coming to see Milly in our beautiful house, I seize the chance to make it a reality. Why don't we fix a date now? I turn to the others. And maybe we could take Milly and the children to the music festival and have a picnic there. They seem to be getting along well. Doesn't it start at the beginning of July? What a good idea, Diane exclaims. And is anybody interested in a trip to the zoo? I've promised to take mine as soon as school breaks up. Milly would love that, I say, eager to fill her diary. Before you get carried away, Grace, Jack interrupts, I have another surprise for you. Well, for you and Milly, actually. I feel myself go cold. Another surprise. Don't look so worried, Moira jokes. Knowing Jack, I'm sure it'll be something nice. I didn't really want to tell you yet, Jack says apologetically to me, but as you're making all these arrangements for the summer holidays, I think you should know that I'm taking you and Milly to New Zealand to see your parents. New Zealand, breathes Diane. Gosh, I've always wanted to go to New Zealand. When? I stammer. Well, I thought we'd give Milly a few days to settle in and leave around the middle of July, he says. But Milly's meant to be starting work at the garden centre in August, I say, wondering what he's playing at. It's a long way to go for a couple of weeks. I'm sure they won't mind if she starts a week or two later, especially if we explain why. Don't you think it'll be too much for Milly, going to New Zealand so soon after moving in? Surely it would be better to wait until Christmas. I think she'll be thrilled, Janice intervenes. She's been dreaming of going since we did a class project on New Zealand, just after your parents moved there. If I went to New Zealand, I'm not sure I'd want to come back, says Diane. It's meant to be quite beautiful. That's one of the dangers, of course, agrees Jack. Milly could end up loving it so much that she might ask to stay there permanently with her parents. The pennies begin to drop, and I realise that he's preparing Milly's exit from society. She would never do that, I say fiercely. For a start, she would never leave me. But what if you decided to stay there too? Jack asks. His tone is playful, but I understand only too well that he's preparing the ground for my exit as well. I wouldn't, I say. I could never leave you, Jack. Surely you know that. But I could kill you, I add silently. In fact, I'm going to have to. Past. The pile of pills under my mattress gave me a new lease of life. For the first time in 6 months, escaping from Jack became a real possibility, and I felt humbly grateful to Milly for stepping in and forcing me to take charge again. After the trouble she had gone to get me the pills, I was determined not to let her down. but I needed to plan carefully. Not least of my problems was the fact that the pills were an unknown quantity. Even if I managed to get them into Jack, I had no idea how long it would be before they started to take effect, or what that effect would be. And how many pills would it take to knock him out? There were so many variables, so many ifs and buts. I began by looking for a way to get them into one of Jack's drinks. The only time we ever took a drink together was when we were at dinner with other people around, and if my plan was to work, I would have to get him to take the pills here, in this house, while we were on our own. I spent the night considering every possibility, and by the time he brought me my dinner the following evening, I already had an idea of how I could do it, but I needed to start laying the foundations at once. I made sure he found me sitting despondently on the bed, my back to the door. When I didn't turn around and take the tray, as I usually did, he placed it beside me on the bed and left without saying a word. Just knowing that the food was there was difficult, especially as I hadn't eaten since lunch with Millie the previous day, but I was determined not to eat it. The next day, he didn't bother bringing me any food at all, but as the tray was still there and I was even hungrier, it was hard not to be tempted. But whenever I considered giving in and eating just a little to stave off the hunger pangs, I conjured up a picture of the room in the basement and placed Millie inside it. Then it was easy. On the third day, mindful perhaps that he had neglected to feed me the day before, Jack brought me breakfast. When he saw that the tray he had brought me 2 days previously was untouched, he looked at me curiously. "Not hungry?" I shook my head. "No." "In that case, I'll take your breakfast back down to the kitchen." He left, taking both meals with him, and without food around it was easier. To help me ignore the hunger pains, I meditated, but when I still hadn't eaten anything by the weekend, nor touched any of the wine he had brought me, Jack got suspicious. "You're not on some kind of hunger strike, are you?" he hazarded as he picked up another tray of uneaten food and replaced it with a fresh one. I shook my head lethargically. "I'm just not hungry, that's all." "Why not?" I took a while in replying. "I suppose I never really thought it would come to this," I admitted, picking nervously at the bed cover. "I always thought that, in the end, I'd find a way of saving Millie from you." "Let me guess. You thought that good would triumph over evil, or that a knight in shining armour would come along and rescue you and Millie from your fate." "Something like that." I let a sob catch my throat. "But it's not going to happen, is it? Millie is going to move in with us, and there's nothing I can do about it." "If it's any consolation, there never was anything you could do about it. But I'm glad you've begun to accept the inevitable. It will make everything easier for you in the long run." I nodded at the glass of wine on the tray he'd brought me, trying to ignore the chicken and potatoes that looked so delicious. "I don't suppose I could have a whiskey instead of the wine, could I?" "Whiskey?" "Yes." "I didn't know you drank whiskey. And I didn't know you were a psychopath. Just bring me a whiskey, Jack," I went on, rubbing my eyes tiredly. "I used to drink it with my father, if you must know." I felt him looking at me, but I kept my head bowed in what I hoped was a picture of misery. He left the room, locking the door behind him. I had no way of knowing whether he would bring me the whiskey I'd asked for, and the smell of the chicken was so tantalizing that I began a slow count, promising myself that if he hadn't come back by the time I got to 100, I would eat the lot. I wasn't even at 50 when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. At 60, the key turned in the lock, and I closed my eyes, knowing that if he hadn't brought me a whiskey, I would probably burst into tears, because the effort of denying myself food for almost a week would have been for nothing. "Here." I opened my eyes and looked at the plastic cup he was holding out to me. "What is it?" I asked suspiciously. "Whiskey." I made to take it, but he pulled his hand back. "First eat. You'll be no good to me if you're too weak to look after Millie." Although his words chilled me, they also told me that I was on the right track, because he had never given in to any of my demands before, not even when I'd asked for a larger towel to dry myself with. But I supposed that with his end goal in sight, he couldn't afford to let anything happen to me, which meant he was more likely to give in to any requests I made as long as they were reasonable. It was a major triumph, and although I had planned to hold out a little longer before eating, I reasoned that if I wanted Jack to bring me more whiskey, I would have to meet him halfway. But I wanted him to bring it to me as soon as he got in from work. I wanted him to get into the habit of pouring my whiskey at the same time as he poured his. "I asked for whiskey because I hoped it would give me an appetite," I said, my arm still outstretched. "So can I have it, please?" I expected him to refuse, but after a small hesitation, he handed it to me. I raised the cup to my lips with pretend eagerness. The smell made my stomach turn, but at least I knew it was whiskey I was about to drink, and not something else. Conscious of his eyes on me, I took a sip. I had never drunk whiskey before in my life, and the bitter taste was a shock. "Not to your liking?" he mocked, and I knew he didn't really believe that I liked whiskey, and had only given it to me to find out what my real motive was in asking for it in the first place. "Have you ever drunk whiskey out of a plastic cup?" I demanded, taking another sip. "Believe me, it doesn't taste quite the same. Maybe you can bring it in a glass next time." I raised the cup again and knocked the whole lot back. "Now, eat something," he said, pushing the tray towards me. My head spinning from the whiskey, I put the tray on my lap. The food looked so good, I would have been capable of clearing the plate in 15 seconds. It was hard not to wolf it down, but I made myself eat slowly, as if I had no pleasure in what I was tasting. I only allowed myself to eat half of it, and when I put my knife and fork down, I'm not sure who was more disappointed, me or Jack. "Can't you eat a little more?" He frowned. "No, sorry," I said unenthusiastically. "Maybe tomorrow." He left, taking the tray with him, and although I was still hungry, the taste of victory was sweeter than anything I could have eaten. Jack wasn't stupid. The next day, when I didn't eat anything again, he decided to hit me where he knew it would hurt me most. "I'm cancelling our visit to Millie tomorrow," he said as he picked up the untouched tray. "There's no point taking her out to lunch if you're not going to eat." I'd known there was a risk he wouldn't take me to see Millie, but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make. "All right," I shrugged. From the look of surprise he gave me, I knew he'd been expecting me to insist that I was well enough to go, and I was glad I had wrong-footed him. "Millie is going to be so disappointed," he sighed. "Well, won't be for the first time." He thought for a moment. This wouldn't be some little ploy to get me to cancel Millie's birthday party, would it? It was a conclusion I hadn't expected him to come to, and one that was far from the truth, but I wondered if I could get it to work in my favour. "Why would I want you to do that?" I asked, playing for time. "You tell me." "Maybe you should try and put yourself in my position for once. If Millie comes here, she's going to fall in love with this house. How do you think that's going to make me feel, knowing what you have in store for her, and knowing I can do nothing to prevent it from happening?" "Let me guess." He pretended to think for a moment. "Not good?" I willed tears of self-pity into my eyes. "Yes, that's right, Jack. Not good. So bad, in fact, that I'd prefer to die." "So, this is some kind of hunger strike, then?" "No, Jack, of course it isn't. I know that Millie is going to need me. I know I have to keep my strength up, but I can't help it if I've lost my appetite. I'm sure most people would, given the circumstances. I let my voice raise an octave. Have you any idea what it's like for me on a day-to-day basis, not being able to choose what I want to eat or when I want to eat? Have you any idea what it's like to have to rely on you for absolutely everything? To sometimes have to wait 2 or 3 days for food because you decide I need punishing or can't be bothered to bring me anything? You're not exactly the most generous of jailers, Jack. Perhaps you shouldn't have made so many attempts to escape, he snapped. If you hadn't, I wouldn't have needed to confine you to this room, and you would have led a perfectly decent life with me. Decent? With you controlling my every move? You don't even know the meaning of the word. Go on, Jack. You punish me. Deprive me of food, see if I care. If I don't eat again for a week, at least I'll be too weak to attend Millie's birthday party next Sunday. You'd better start eating again, he threatened, realizing the truth of what I'd said. Or what, Jack? I taunted. You can't force me to eat, you know. I paused. But, as it isn't in Millie's interest that I die, or in yours, why don't you do us both a favour and pour me a whiskey in the evenings when you pour your own, and my appetite might come back a little. I call the shots around here, remember? He reminded me. However, when it came to food, he no longer did. Realizing that he needed to keep me healthy, he began to do as I'd asked. I made sure that I never ate much, because it was important he thought I really had lost my appetite, but it was equally important that I ate enough to merit the small amount of whiskey he brought me when he got in from work. By the time Millie's party came round, I was confident I'd be able to achieve my aim before Millie came to live with us, 2 months down the line, as long as nothing happened to interrupt the routine of Jack bringing me whiskey every evening. Present. I stand in front of the house, my case at my feet. The double gates are shut, but the small gate, the one that I came out of, is ajar. I hear Esther's car approaching, and, turning back towards the house, I give a little wave. She pulls up next to me, gets out, and opens the boot. I could have come all the way to the door, you know, she reproaches, helping me to lift my suitcase into the car. I thought it would save time. Thank you for coming to fetch me at such short notice. No problem, she smiles. But we're going to have to hurry if you're to make your flight. As she closes the boot, I wave towards the house again, blow a kiss, and pull the gate closed behind me. I wish he was coming with me, I say fretfully. I hate leaving him when he's so down. It's the first case he's lost, isn't it? Yes, I think that's why he's taken it so hard. But he did think the husband was guilty, or he wouldn't have taken it on in the first place. Unfortunately, Dina Anderson was less than truthful with Jack and hid certain things from him, including the fact that she had a lover. It seems he was the real culprit. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I expect he'll tell me when he joins me. It's funny, I used to travel all over the world on my own, yet the thought of spending a few days alone in Thailand is disconcerting. I'm so used to having Jack with me. I'm not quite sure what he expects me to do for the next 4 days. Have a nice rest, I suppose. I would rather have waited for him, but he was so insistent, I go on, and I know better to argue with him when he's made up his mind about something. I look over at her. You see, he can be a little imperfect sometimes. Insisting that you go ahead of him on holiday is not imperfect, she reminds me. No, I suppose not. Once he explained that he wouldn't enjoy the holiday if he had to face all the paperwork when he came back. I understood better. He really needs to be able to relax on this holiday, especially as it's probably the last we'll be able to have on our own. It's normal that he prefers to stay and get everything filed away, although I rather think that if he'd won the case, he wouldn't have minded quite so much about being reminded of it when we got back, I add ruefully. He probably wants to lick his wounds in private, she agrees. You know what men are like. The thing is, we're hoping to conceive a baby while we're in Thailand, which is another reason he wants to be completely relaxed. It's about the right time, I admit, blushing a little. She takes her hand off the wheel and gives mine a squeeze. I really hope it works out for you both. Well, if it does, you'll be the first to know, I promise. I can't wait to have Jack's child. He was so disappointed when I had my last miscarriage. He tried to be strong for me, but it really affected him, especially when I didn't conceive again immediately afterwards. I told him that these things take time, that my body needed to recover first, but he began wondering if it was down to him and the demands of his job, you know, the stress and everything. Do you think he'll want to come round for dinner or something over the weekend? To be honest, I think he'd rather stay and plough through his paperwork, but you could always ask him, although I'm not sure you'll be able to get hold of him as he doesn't intend answering his phone over the next few days. He already had to deal with the media when he came out of court this afternoon, and he knows they're going to be on his back over the next few days. But you can always leave a message on his voicemail. That's what he told me to do if I can't get through to him, especially with the time difference and everything. And he's joining you on Tuesday? Yes. Well, early Wednesday morning. He's taking the Tuesday evening flight, although he did say he might be delayed a day or two, but I think he was joking, at least I hope he was. So you'll only have 4 days on your own? Gosh, what I wouldn't give for 4 days of peace. Does he need taking to the airport on Tuesday? Rufus would do it. No, it's fine. Adam offered, but Jack's going to take the car and leave it at the airport. We'll need it for when we get back. The flight gets in around 6 in the morning, and we wouldn't ask anyone to come and pick us up at that ungodly hour. I'm surprised how easily we chat on the way to the airport. I was expecting a far more uncomfortable ride, but she seems content to talk about the most ordinary of things. She asks if she and the children could go and see Millie at the weekend, and maybe take her out for tea, and remembering how well Millie and Aisling got on at the party, I agree gratefully, glad that Millie will have some visitors while I'm away. She asks me to let Janice know that they'll call by on Sunday, and I promise that I will. We arrive at the airport with 15 minutes to spare. She drops me off at departures and leaves me with a cheery wave. I go into the terminal building, find the British Airways counter, check in my case, and make my way to the departure lounge. Then I take a seat in the corner and wait for my flight to be called. Past. Until the day of Millie's party, I never really thought I would kill Jack. I dreamt about it often enough, but in the cold light of day, I balked at the thought of killing another human being. It was probably why my attempt to stun him with the bottle failed. I'd been too scared to hit him any harder, in case I killed him. There was also the fact that if I did kill him, I would almost certainly be sent to prison and be held in custody while I waited trial, which would be terrible for Millie. So all I wanted was to knock him out long enough for me to be able to escape from him. But the minute he mentioned taking me and Millie to New Zealand, I knew I was going to have to kill him, whatever the consequences, because getting away from him would never be enough. So that's how you're going to do it, I said bitterly once we'd waved Millie and Janice off after the party. You're going to shut up the house, pretend we've all gone off to New Zealand, and then suddenly reappear on your own, and tell everyone that Millie and I have decided to stay over there, when, in reality, we'll be hidden away in the basement. More or less, he confirmed, except that it'll be too much trouble to shut up the house and pretend I'm not here, so I'll find an excuse to send the two of you on to New Zealand ahead of me, and in the end, I'll be so delayed it won't be worth joining you, because you'll be practically on your way back. And then, just as I'm about to leave for the airport to pick you up, I'll get a tearful call from you, saying that Millie refused to get on the plane and that you, torn between loving husband and lunatic sister, didn't get on the plane either. And, loving husband that I am, I'll tell everybody that because I know how difficult it's going to be for you to leave Millie behind, I've given you permission to stay on a little longer. Except, the little longer will become a lot longer, until one sad day you'll tell me you're never coming back. And because I'm broken-hearted, people won't dare mention your name to me, and eventually they'll forget that you and Millie ever existed. And my parents? I demanded. How will you explain our disappearance to them? I'll probably just kill them. Now, get up to your room. I turned away from him so that he couldn't see how much his words had shocked me. Finding a way out, killing Jack, had never seemed more urgent, and I knew that if I went back to my room, another opportunity would be lost. It was time to put the next part of my plan into action. Can't I stay down here a while? I asked. No. Why not? You know very well why. When was the last time I tried to escape? Look at me, Jack. Do you really think you're in danger from me? Have I done anything except behave as perfectly as possible for the last 6 months? Do you honestly think that I want to risk going down to the basement? It's true that your trips down there seem to have had the desired effect, but nonetheless, you'll be going up to your room. Then, could I move into another room? Why? Why do you think? Because I need a change of scene, that's why. I'm fed up looking at the same 4 walls, day in, day out. All right. I looked at him in surprise. Really? Yes. Come on, I'll take you down to the basement, and you can look at the 4 walls there instead. Or do you think that maybe your room isn't so bad after all? I think maybe my room isn't so bad after all, I said dully. That's a shame. You see, I think the room in the basement has been empty for far too long. Shall I let you into a secret? He leant down towards me and lowered his voice to a whisper. It was hard, very hard, to let Millie leave just now. Much harder than I thought it would be. In fact, it was so hard that I'm going to suggest she moves in as soon as we get back from Thailand. What do you think, Grace? Won't it be lovely to be one happy family? I knew then that not only would I have to kill Jack, I would have to kill him before we left for Thailand. Terrible though it was to realise how little time I had left, having a deadline helped me focus. As I went up the stairs in front of him, I was already planning my next move. When you bring me up my whiskey, will you stay and have one with me? I asked as I got undressed. Now, why would I want to do that? Because I'm tired of being cooped up for 24 hours a day with no one to talk to, I said listlessly. Have you any idea what it's like? Sometimes I feel as if I'm going mad. In fact, I wish I would. I let my voice rise. What would you do then, Jack? What will you do if I go mad? Of course you're not going to go mad, he retorted, pushing me into my bedroom and closing the door. I might, I called after him. I just might. And I want my whiskey in a glass. I don't know whether it was because he'd refused me everything else I'd asked for, or if he was worried that I really would go mad. But whatever the reason, when he came back 10 minutes later, he was carrying 2 glasses. Thank you, I said, taking a sip. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. It's about the Thomasin case. He married an actress, didn't he? Dina, somebody or other. I seem to remember reading something about it, back in the days when I was allowed to read newspapers. Dina Anderson. So, is she accusing him of beating her up? I'm not allowed to discuss my cases. Well, everybody here today seemed to know about it, so either you haven't been very discreet, or it's common knowledge, I said reasonably. Doesn't he give most of his fortune to good causes? It doesn't mean he's not a wife-beater. What did Adam mean about her having a lover? Adam was just being provocative. So there's no truth in what he said? None at all. One of the tabloids invented the story to discredit her. Why would they do that? Because Anthony Tomassin is one of their shareholders. Now, drink up. I'm not leaving here without the glass. Once he'd left, I took the screw of tissue out from under my mattress and opened it. I counted out the pills. There were 20 in all. I had no idea if that would be enough to kill Jack, especially as I was going to have to use someone myself, first of all to find out how strong they were, and secondly to see if they would dissolve in liquid once they'd been crushed. Going into the bathroom, I tore 2 sheets of toilet paper from the roll and, after a lot of deliberation, put 4 of the pills between them, hoping it would be enough to knock me out without making me ill. I put the paper on the floor and crushed them as best I could with my foot. I had no cup to put the resulting granules in, so I used the top from my shampoo bottle as a receptacle and added some water. They dissolved a little, but not quite enough, and as I drank them down, I knew I'd have to find a way of grinding the rest of the pills into a finer powder. I started to feel drowsy some 15 minutes later and fell asleep almost immediately. I slept solidly for 14 hours, and when I woke, I felt slightly groggy and unbelievably thirsty. As Jack was almost twice my weight, I reckoned that 8 of the pills would have more or less the same effect on him, but that 16 wouldn't be enough to kill him outright. It was a major blow, as it meant that I'd have to find a way, once he was unconscious, of finishing everything myself. But even though I wanted him dead, I wasn't sure that when it actually came down to it, I would be capable of going down to the kitchen, fetching a knife from the drawer, and sticking it into his heart. I decided not to think that far ahead, and concentrated instead on getting Jack to stay a little longer with me when he brought me my whiskey in the evenings, reiterating what I told him before, that I felt as if I was going mad with no one to talk to all day. I hoped that eventually he would feel comfortable enough to start bringing up a whiskey for himself, as he had on the day of Millie's party, because if he didn't, I would have no way of drugging him. My lucky break came when the Tomassin case didn't turn out to be as straightforward as he expected. A week into the court case, as I sat on the bed, sipping the whiskey he'd brought me, and listened to him moaning about the number of character witnesses Anthony Tomassin had brought in, I told him he looked as if he could use a drink himself, and he went down to fetch one. From then on, every evening, he brought up 2 glasses, and when he began to linger longer than before, I understood that he needed to talk about what had happened in court that day. He never discussed the case with me in depth, but from what he said, it was obvious that Anthony Tomassin was putting up a robust defence, with a string of influential people attesting to his good character. The case began to drag on, and because Jack never mentioned our trip to Thailand, I presumed he had cancelled it, or at least postponed it. On the evening before we'd been due to leave, Jack came up to my room, carrying the usual 2 glasses of whiskey. "Drink up," he said, handing me a glass. "You need to pack." "Pack?" "Yes, we're going to Thailand tomorrow, remember?" I stared at him in horror. "But how can we go away if the case isn't over yet?" I stammered. "It will be tomorrow," he said grimly, swilling his whiskey in his glass. "I didn't realise the jury were out." "They've been out for 2 days. They've promised the verdict before lunch tomorrow." Looking at him closely, I noticed how drawn he looked. "You are going to win, aren't you?" He knocked back most of the whiskey. That stupid bitch lied to me. What do you mean? She did have a lover. So it was him? No, it was her husband, he said stonily, because he couldn't bring himself to say anything else, not even to me. Then you've got nothing to worry about, have you? He finished his glass. You don't know how glad I am that we're going to Thailand. If I've failed to convince the jury, it'll be the first case I've ever lost, and the press are going to have a field day. I can see the headlines already. Fallen angel, or something equally trite. Right, have you finished? It's time to pack. As I took clothes out of the wardrobe in the bedroom next door, with Jack looking on, I hoped he wouldn't notice how shaken I was. I threw them into the case without giving any thought to what I was doing, preoccupied by the knowledge that the following day, when he came back from court, I was going to have to kill him, long before I planned to, because I'd foolishly counted on our holiday being cancelled. But he too seemed lost in thought, and, realising how much winning meant to him, I felt anxious about the sort of mood he'd be in when he came back the next day. If he lost, he might insist on leaving for the airport straight away to get away from the press, even though our flight was in the evening, which meant that I wouldn't have time to drug him. That night, I prayed as I had never prayed before. I reminded God of all the evil Jack had already done, and all the evil he was going to do. I thought about Molly, about how he had locked her up and left her to die of dehydration. I thought about Millie and the fate he planned for her. I thought about the room in the basement. And suddenly, I had the answer to my problem. I knew exactly how I could make sure that he died. It was perfect. So perfect that if it worked, I would literally get away with murder. Present. It's only when the flight takes off that I begin to relax a little. But I know that even when I arrive in Bangkok, I'll be looking over my shoulder the whole time. I doubt the feeling of menace will ever leave me. Even the fact that Millie is safe at school isn't enough to allay my fears that Jack will somehow get to us. I had thought to bring her with me. I had wanted to tell Janice that Jack had given Millie his place on the plane and ask her to bring her to the airport. But it's better that she isn't involved in what's to come. I'm going to have a hard enough time keeping my nerve. To have to watch over Millie at the same time might prove too much for me. After everything I've been through in the last few hours, the slightest thing could make me lose the control I'm trying so hard to maintain. But I remind myself that there will be enough time to let my mask slip a little when I arrive in Thailand, once I'm behind closed doors. Going through passport control in Bangkok is a nightmare. The fear of Jack's hand on my shoulder never greater, although it would have been impossible for him to have got here before me. Even so, I find myself checking the face of the taxi driver before I get into his car to make sure it isn't Jack sitting behind the wheel. At the hotel, I'm warmly greeted by Mr. Ho, the manager who wrote the letter about me, and when he expresses surprise that I'm alone, I express equal surprise that he hasn't received Mr. Angel's email asking him to look after me until he arrives. Mr. Ho tells me he will be delighted to do so, and commiserates when I tell him that work commitments have kept my husband from joining me until Wednesday. I sense the manager hesitate. Is it possible, he asks, that my husband, Mr. Jack Angel, is the Mr. Angel mentioned in some of the English newspapers recently in relation to the Anthony Thomasin case? I admit, in strictest confidence, that he and my husband are indeed one and the same, and that we hope we can count on him to be discreet, as we would rather nobody knows where we're staying. He tells me that he heard on the international news yesterday that Mr. Thomasin was acquitted, and when I confirm that he heard correctly, He says that Mr. Angel must have been disappointed. And I tell him that, yes, Mr. Angel was very disappointed, especially as it was the first time he's lost a case. As Mr. Ho signs me in, he asks me how I've been keeping, a delicate nod to my mental state, and if I had a good flight. When I tell him that I found it hard to sleep, he says the least he can do for such a good client as Mr. Angel is upgrade us to one of their suites. The relief I feel that I won't have to go back to the room where I realised I had married a monster is so great I feel like kissing him. Mr. Ho insists on escorting me to my new room himself. It crosses my mind that he might wonder why we always stay in one of the smaller rooms when Jack is such an illustrious lawyer. So I make sure to mention that my husband likes to maintain anonymity when we're on holiday, rather than draw attention to himself by throwing money around. I don't quite put it like that, but he gets the gist. Once Mr. Ho has left, I turn the television on and search for Sky News. Even in Asia, the Thomasin verdict is big news, and as they show Anthony Thomasin addressing reporters as he came out of court the previous day, Jack appears in the background, besieged by journalists. Unable to watch any longer, I turn the television off quickly. I'm desperate for a shower, but there are 2 calls I need to make. One to Janice, and the other to Jack, to tell them that I've arrived safely. Luckily, both are numbers that I know by heart. Jack's from when I first met him, and Janice's because it's the most important number in the world. I look at my watch. It's 3 in the afternoon local time, which means it's 9 in the morning in England. As the wife of Jack Angel, I make sure to get my priorities right and call him first. I have a momentary panic when I realise that any time over the past year, he could have changed his number. So when I get through to his voicemail, I feel weak with relief. I take a deep breath to steady myself and leave the sort of message a loving wife would leave. The sort of message I might have left had I been able to carry on living the dream. Hello, darling, it's me. I know you told me you might not pick up, but I was rather hoping you would. As you can tell, I'm missing you already. But maybe you're still in bed? Anyway, I've arrived safely, and guess what? Mr. Ho felt so sorry for me being on my own that he's upgraded us to a better room. Even so, I know I'm going to hate being here without you. Anyway, I hope the press aren't hounding you too much, and that you're managing to get through all your paperwork. Don't work too hard, and if you've got a minute, please call me back. I'm in room 107, otherwise I'll try you again later. I love you. Bye for now. I hang up and dial Janice's mobile. At this time on a Saturday morning, she and Millie should have finished breakfast and be on their way to the stables for Millie's riding lesson. When Janice doesn't answer immediately, my heart pounds with fear, in case Jack has somehow managed to get to Millie after all. But eventually she does, and while I speak to her, I remember to mention that Esther and her children will be calling in to see Millie the next day. Then I speak to Millie, and just knowing she is safe, at least for the time being, makes me feel better. I walk into the bathroom. The shower stands in the corner, concealed behind opaque doors, which means I can't use it as there's always the possibility, however slight, that I may come out and find Jack standing on the other side of them. I look at the bath and work out that if I leave the door open, as well as that of the bedroom, I'll be able to see through to the sitting room and so the main door. Reassured, I fill the bath, strip off my clothes, and lower myself tentatively into the hot water. As it rises up around my shoulders, the tension that engulfed me the moment I heard Jack step into the house at 3 o'clock the previous afternoon melts away, and I begin to cry, in huge, racking sobs, which tear from my body at an alarming rate. By the time I manage to pull myself together, The water is so cold I'm shivering. Climbing out, I wrap myself in one of the white toweling robes provided by the hotel and go into the bedroom. I'm desperately hungry, so I pick up the room service menu. I'm going to have to leave my room at some point if I'm to carry on pretending that everything's all right. But I can't. Not yet. I order a club sandwich, but when it arrives, I'm too frightened to open the door, even with the chain on, in case I find Jack standing there. Instead, I call for the tray to be left outside my room, which isn't much better because there's still the possibility that he'll be lurking in the corridor, waiting to bundle me back inside as soon as I open the door. Finding the courage to open the door wide enough to pull the tray into the room is a major triumph, and I wish I'd thought of ordering a bottle of wine along with the sandwich so that I could celebrate. But I remind myself that there will be plenty of time to celebrate later, when it's all over. Approximately 5 days from now, if my calculations are correct. Whether they are or not is something I have no way of knowing. At least, not yet. When I've finished eating, I unpack my case and look at my watch. It's only 5:30, and because nobody would expect me to go down to dinner alone on my first night in the hotel, I feel justified in staying in my room for the rest of the day. Feeling suddenly exhausted, I lie down on the bed, not really expecting to be able to sleep. But I do, and when I next open my eyes and find that the room is in darkness, I leap out of bed, my heart thumping in my chest, and run around the room, turning on all the lights. I know I'm not going to be able to sleep again for fear of opening my eyes and finding Jack standing over me. So I resign myself to spending a long night with only my thoughts for company. When morning comes, I get dressed, pick up the phone, and dial Jack's number. "Hello, darling. I wasn't really expecting to get you because it's 2 in the morning in England, so you must be fast asleep. But I thought I'd leave a message for you to listen to when you wake up. I meant to phone you before I went to sleep last night, but I lay down on the bed at 6 in the evening and only just woke up 10 minutes ago, which just goes to show how tired I was. I'm going down to breakfast in a minute, but I've got no idea how I'm going to spend the rest of the day. Might go for a walk, but probably just hang around the pool. Will you give me a ring when you wake up? You can always leave a message at the reception if I'm not in my room. I feel an awfully long way from you, which I am, of course. Anyway, I love you and miss you. Don't forget to phone me." I make my way down for breakfast. Mr. Ho is on duty. He asks if I slept well, and I tell him that I did. He suggests I eat out on the terrace, and I cross the lobby, remembering all the times Jack walked me across it on the way to the dining room, his hand gripping my arm tightly while he whispered menaces in my ear. Once outside, I help myself to fruit and pancakes and find a table in the corner, wondering if anyone else in the world has been as fooled by a man as I was. It seems strange that I'll never be able to tell anyone what I've been through. Never be able to tell them about the monster I was married to. Not if everything turns out as well as I hope it will. I eat slowly, needing to pass the time, and as I eat, I realize that if I crane my neck, I can see the balcony of the room on the 6th floor where I spent so many lonely hours. I sit there for over an hour, wishing I'd brought a book with me. Sitting on my own with nothing to distract me might look suspicious, as there can't be many people who go on holiday without taking a book with them, except those that leave in a hurry. I seem to remember Jack walking me past a second-hand bookshop on our way to take photographs of the two of us having a wonderful time in Bangkok. So I leave the hotel and go in search of it. I find it easily. It's the sort of place I love. But I feel too conspicuous to linger, so I buy a couple of books and return to the hotel, marvelling that I can feel relatively safe in a place that once held such horrors for me. In my room, I change into a bikini and go down to the pool, arming myself with a book and a towel. As I climb out of the pool after a swim, I notice a couple of men looking in my direction and prepare to tell them, should they decide to come and talk to me, that my husband is arriving in 2 days' time. I eke out the time until 3 o'clock by reading my book and swimming, then leave the terrace and go up to my room, where I leave a disappointed message on Jack's mobile. "Jack, it's me. I was hoping you'd have phoned me by now, but you're probably still asleep, which can only be a good thing, as I've been worrying that you're driving yourself into the ground working 24 hours a day. I've been at the pool all morning, so I'm going to go for a walk now. I'll phone you when I get back. Love you." I wait in my room for an hour or so, then go down to the lobby and, with a quick wave to Mr. Ho, who seems to work 24 hours a day, go out through the main doors. I walk around for a while, find myself in a market and spend some time buying silk scarves for Janice and Millie. I buy some postcards, search for a bar, order a non-alcoholic cocktail, read my book, write my cards, and wonder how I'm going to be able to fill in the next couple of days. I head back to the hotel and am immediately cornered by Mr. Ho, who wants to know if I'm enjoying myself. I confide that I'm at a bit of a loss without Jack, and ask if I could perhaps book an excursion for the following day. He tells me about an overnight trip to ancient temples that some of the hotel guests are going on, and asks me if I'd be interested in joining them. It's the perfect solution, but it's important that I don't look too eager, so I hum and a little and ask when exactly we'd be back, pointing out that Jack is due in on Wednesday morning. He promises that I'll be back at the hotel on Tuesday evening, and, after a bit more hesitation, I let myself be persuaded. I add that because I'm going to have to get up extra early the next morning, I'll probably just have dinner in my room, and he agrees that it's a good idea. I go up to my room and phone Jack once again. "Hello, darling. Still no message from you, so I can't help wondering if you've gone to Esther's for lunch. She said she'd invite you over at some point. I told her you'd probably be too busy, but maybe you needed a break. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I've decided to go on an overnight trip to some temples, leaving early tomorrow morning. Mr. Ho suggested it, and at least it'll pass the time until you get here. I hate the thought of not being able to speak to you before Tuesday evening, which will be Tuesday afternoon for you. I'm definitely going to buy a mobile when we get back to England. But I'll phone you as soon as I get back to the hotel and hopefully catch you before you leave for the airport. I thought I might come and meet you off the flight. I know you said not to, that you'll make your own way here, but maybe after being apart from me for 4 days you'll have changed your mind. I can't wait to see you. You may as well know that I'm never going away without you again, no matter how much work you have. Well, I'd better go and throw a few things together. Remember, I love you very much. I'll speak to you Tuesday. Don't work too hard." The next morning, I go on the trip and attach myself to a lovely middle-aged couple who, when I explain that I'm on my own because I'm waiting for my husband to come out and join me, take me under their wing. I talk to them about Jack and about the brilliant work he does on behalf of battered wives with such conviction that I almost believe it myself. They end up putting 2 and 2 together because they've read the papers, and I end up admitting that Jack Angel is indeed my husband. Fortunately, they're discreet enough not to mention the Tomasin case, although I can tell that they're itching to. Instead, I tell them about Millie, about how much we're looking forward to her coming to live with us, and how grateful I am to have such a wonderfully accepting husband. I tell them about our house, about Millie's yellow bedroom, and about the party we gave her for her 18th birthday just a few weeks before. By the time we get back to the hotel, later on Tuesday evening than expected, they've become firm friends, and as we go off to our rooms, I accept their kind invitation for Jack and me to have dinner with them once he arrives. In my room, I look at my watch. It's almost 11 o'clock, so 5 in the afternoon in England. It's plausible that Jack could already have left for the airport, so I phone his mobile and get through to his voicemail. This time, I make sure to sound dismayed. Jack, it's me. I've just got back from the trip to the temples, later than expected, and I can't believe you're still not answering your phone. I hope it doesn't mean that you're still working, because you should be leaving for the airport soon, unless you're already on your way. But could you phone me as soon as you get this message, please, just to let me know that everything is on schedule for you leaving tonight? I know you told me you'd be incommunicado, but I expected to be able to speak to you at least once before you left. I, hoped to find a message waiting for me on my phone here. I don't mean to nag. I'm beginning to get a bit worried by your silence. I hope it doesn't mean that you want to tell me you're not coming until Thursday, by any chance. Anyway, please phone me as soon as you get this message. Don't worry that I'll be asleep. I won't be. I wait for half an hour or so, try his number again, and when it goes through to his voicemail, I leave an "It's me again, please phone me" message. Half an hour after that, I simply give a sigh of frustration before hanging up. Going over to my bag, I take out Jack's business card and call his office. A receptionist answers, and without giving my name, I ask to be put through to Adam. Hello, Adam, it's Grace. Grace, how are you? How's Thailand? I'm fine, and Thailand is as lovely as ever. I thought you might still be in the office. I'm not disturbing you, am I? No, it's fine. I was in a meeting with a client, but he's just left, thank goodness. It's one of those cases that I don't particularly want to take on. His wife is determined to take him to the cleaners, and I can't help feeling sorry for him. Not that I'm letting my emotions get in the way, of course, he adds with a laugh. That certainly wouldn't be good for business, I agree. Anyway, I won't keep you long. I just wondered if you saw Jack at all over the weekend, or at least spoke to him, because I haven't been able to get through to him and I'm beginning to get a bit worried. I know he told me that he wouldn't be answering his phone because of the press, but I thought he might pick up for me. Maybe he did for you? There's a bit of a silence. Are you saying that Jack is still in England? Yes, well, until tonight anyway. He's taking the evening flight, remember? Well, at least I hope he is. He did say he might not be able to get here until Thursday, but I didn't think he really meant it. The trouble is, I can't get through to him. Grace, I had no idea Jack was here. I thought he was in Thailand with you. I thought he left on Friday evening, after the case. No, he made me come on ahead. He said he wanted to get all the paperwork out of the way first, that he couldn't bear the thought of having to face it all when he came back. Well, I understand that, I suppose. There's nothing worse than coming back from holiday and finding a backlog of work, and it's always harder when it concerns a case that you've lost. I guess he must be feeling pretty low. You could say that, I admit. As a matter of fact, I've never seen him so down, which is why I wanted to stay with him. But he said he preferred to be on his own, that if I was around it would take him longer to get through everything, and then we'd both miss out on our holiday. So, here I am. Between you and me, I never understood why he took the case on in the first place. Maybe he let his emotions get in the way, I suggest. But the thing is, Adam, you must have known he was staying behind, because didn't you offer to take him to the airport this evening? When? Well, on Friday, I presume, when he told you he was staying behind. Sorry, Grace. I'm afraid I haven't spoken to Jack since Friday morning before he left for court, although I did leave a message on his voicemail, commiserating with him over losing. Are you saying that you haven't heard from him since he left? Yes. I wasn't too worried at first because he warned me he wouldn't be answering his phone, and anyway, I was away on an excursion for the last couple of days. But I expected him to have at least left a message on my phone here at the hotel to tell me that everything was on schedule for tonight. He may already have left for the airport. You know what traffic is like in rush hour. But I keep getting through to his voicemail. I know he won't answer the phone if he's driving, but it's really frustrating. Maybe he's forgotten to switch it back on again if it's been off since Friday. Maybe. Listen, Adam, I won't take up any more of your time. I'm sure everything's fine. Do you want me to phone around a few people and see if they've spoken to him at all over the weekend? Would that put your mind at rest? Relief floods my voice. Yes, it would, definitely. You could try Esther. When she took me to the airport, she said she'd invite Jack around sometime over the weekend. Will do. Thanks, Adam. How are Diane and the children, by the way? They're all fine. Let me make those calls and I'll get back to you. Can you give me your number there? I read it out to him from the hotel notepad, which is lying on the bedside table, and sit down on the bed to wait. I try to read, but I find it difficult to concentrate. Half an hour or so later, Adam calls back to tell me that he hasn't found anybody who actually spoke to Jack over the weekend, although several people saw him in the office before he left for court. I've also tried him several times myself, but I got his voicemail each time, as did Esther when she tried to get hold of him. But that doesn't mean anything. As I said, maybe he's just forgotten to switch it back on again. I don't think he would have, especially as he must know that I'll be wanting to speak to him. And there's something else I thought of. Why did he tell me that you'd offered to take him to the airport when you didn't? Maybe he intended to ask me to, then changed his mind. Look, don't worry. I'm sure everything's all right. I'm sure he'll be on that flight tonight. Do you think that if I phone British Airways in a couple of hours, they'll tell me whether or not he's checked in? No, they won't. Not unless it's an emergency. Passenger confidentiality and all that. Then I guess I'll just have to wait until tomorrow morning. I sigh. Well, when you see him, make sure you tell him off for worrying you. And tell him to send me a text to let me know he's arrived. Then could you give me your mobile number? He gives it to me, and I jot it down. Thanks, Adam. Once again, I have trouble sleeping. Early next morning, prettily dressed and beautifully made up, I go down to the lobby. Mr. Ho is once again at the reception desk. He guesses that I've come down to wait for Jack, and tells me that I might have a long wait as there are the queues at passport control to contend with, plus the taxi ride from the airport. He suggests that I have breakfast, but I tell him that I prefer to wait for Jack, that he'll no doubt be hungry when he arrives. I find a seat not too far away from the main door and settle down to wait. As time goes on, I look at my watch anxiously, and when it's evident that something's wrong, I go over to Mr. Ho and ask him if he can find out if the London flight arrived on time. He checks on his computer, and when he tells me that the flight was in fact delayed and is due to land at any moment, I can't believe my luck, because I won't have to pretend panic for another couple of hours. Mr. Ho smiles at the look of relief on my face, and I admit that I was beginning to worry at Jack's non-appearance. I go back to waiting, and Mr. Ho brings me over a cup of tea to help pass the time. When, almost 2 hours later, Jack still hasn't arrived, it's time to start feeling uneasy. I ask to use the phone at the reception desk, and as I dial Jack's number, I tell Mr. Ho that although Jack had warned me he might only be able to make the Wednesday evening flight, I can't help feeling worried, because he would have phoned to let me know. When I get through to his voicemail, my voice is shaky, with tears of disappointment and frustration. Jack, where are you? I know the flight was delayed, but you should be here by now. I hope it doesn't mean you're not arriving until tomorrow. If that's the case, you could have at least warned me. Have you any idea how worrying it is to be without any news from you for the last 4 days? Even if you didn't want to answer your phone, you could have phoned me. You must have got all my messages. Please give me a ring. Jack, it's awful being stuck here, not knowing what's happening. Not that I'm not being well looked after, I add hurriedly, aware that Mr. Ho is listening. Because I am. But I just want you here. Please, phone and tell me what's happening. I'm in the lobby now, but I'll be going up to my room, or you can leave a message with Mr. Ho at reception. I love you. I hang up to find Mr. Ho looking sympathetically at me. He suggests that I go through for breakfast, and when I tell him that I'm not hungry, he promises to call me if Jack phones. So I let him persuade me to have something to eat. As I make my way to the terrace, I bump into Margaret and Richard, the couple I met the day before on the trip to the temples, and my eyes fill with tears of disappointment when I explain that Jack hasn't turned up. They tell me not to worry, pointing out that he had warned me he might be delayed, and insist that I spend the day with them. I tell them I'd rather stay in the hotel for the next couple of hours in case Jack phones or suddenly turns up, but that I'll join them in the afternoon if he doesn't. I go up to my room and phone Adam. I'm relieved when he doesn't pick up, as it suits me to leave a message, letting him know that Jack wasn't on the flight. Later, I go down to join Margaret and Richard, the strain of not having heard from Jack clearly visible on my face, especially when I tell them that I've tried his mobile again several times without success. They are kindness itself, and I'm glad to have them to take my mind off things. I punctuate the time I spend with them with fruitless calls to Jack's mobile, urging him to phone me. In the evening, my new friends refuse to let me sit and mope alone, so we have dinner together, where they talk brightly about how much they're looking forward to meeting Jack the following morning. I eventually get back to my room around midnight and find a message from Adam saying he's sorry he missed my call and asking if I would like him to go over to the house to see if Jack is still there. I phone him back and tell him that yes, if he doesn't mind, but then we work out that if Jack is to catch the flight that evening, he will already have left for the airport. So I tell him not to bother, and that I'll phone him the moment Jack arrives, and we joke again about the telling off he's going to get for worrying us all. The next morning, Margaret and Richard keep me company while I wait for Jack to arrive from the airport, so they are there to witness my distress when he doesn't turn up. At Margaret's suggestion, I try to find out from British Airways if Jack was on the flight, but they are unable to help me. So I phone the British Embassy. I explain everything to them, and maybe because Jack's name is known, they tell me they'll see what they can do. When they phone back and confirm that Jack wasn't on the flight, I burst into tears. I managed to pull myself together long enough to tell them that he doesn't seem to be at home either, but although they are sympathetic, they tell me there isn't a lot they can do at this stage. They suggest I phone friends and relations in England to see if they know where he is, and I thank them and hang up. With Margaret by my side, I call Adam and, my voice trembling with anxiety, tell him what has happened. He immediately offers to go straight round to the house and calls me back half an hour later to say that he's standing outside the gates, but that everything is shut up and nobody has answered the bell. So I worry that Jack has had an accident on the way to the airport, and although he reassures me, he says that he'll make some inquiries. I tell him that the British Embassy suggested I try to find out if anyone has spoken to him since I left, and he offers to phone around for me. While I wait for Adam to get back to me, Diane calls to reassure me and to tell me that Adam is doing all he can to track Jack down. We talk for a while, and after I've hung up, Margaret begins to ask me gentle questions, and it dawns on me that she and Richard are wondering if there could be someone else in Jack's life, someone who he might have run off with. Horrified, I tell her that it had never occurred to me, because there had never been anything in his behaviour to suggest that there was, but that I suppose it's a possibility I'm going to have to consider. The phone rings again. Grace? Hello, Adam. I make my voice hesitant, as if I'm dreading what he's going to tell me. Have you managed to find out anything? Only that Jack hasn't been admitted to any of the hospitals I've phoned, which is good news. It is, I agree, giving a sigh of relief. On the other hand, I phoned as many people as I could think of, but no one seems to have heard from him, at least not over the last few days. So I'm afraid we're back to square one, really. I look at Margaret, who nods encouragingly. There's something I need to ask you, Adam, I say. Go on. Is it possible that Jack was having an affair? Maybe with someone at the office. My words come out in a rush. An affair? Jack? Adam sounds shocked. No, of course not. He would never do anything like that. He barely looked at another woman before he met you, and he certainly hasn't since. You must know that, Grace. Margaret, who gets the gist, gives my hand a squeeze. I do, I say, chastened. It's just that I can't think of any other reason he would suddenly disappear without a trace. Can you think of any other friends he has? People that maybe I don't know? Not really, I say. Wait a minute, what about Moira and Giles? You know, the people who were at Millie's party. Maybe you could contact them? I don't have their number, though. Leave it with me. What's their surname? Kilburn Hawes, I think. I'll give them a ring and get back to you, he promises. He calls back half an hour later, and when he tells me that they haven't heard from Jack either, I become distraught. Nobody seems to know what to do. The general consensus, from Margaret, Richard, Adam and Diane, is that it's too early to launch a missing persons inquiry, so they tell me that the best thing to do would be to try and get some sleep and see if Jack turns up the next morning. He doesn't. The day passes in a blur as Mr. Ho, Margaret, Richard and Adam take over. I tell them I want to go home, but they persuade me to stay for one more day in case Jack turns up. So I do. In the early afternoon, 8 o'clock in the morning in England, Adam calls to say that he's spoken to the police and that, with my permission, they'll be happy to break into the house to see if they can find anything to indicate where Jack might have gone. They call me first and ask me to run through the last time I saw Jack, and I tell them that it was when Esther came to pick me up to take me to the airport, that he had waved me off from the study window. I explain that he hadn't been able to drive me to the airport himself because he'd had quite a large whiskey when he'd come in from work, and add that I hadn't particularly wanted to leave for Thailand by myself, even though Jack had warned me, when the Tomasin case began to look as if it would overrun, that I might have to. They say they'll get back to me as soon as they can, and I sit in my room and wait for them to phone, with Margaret by my side, holding my hand. I know the news I'm waiting for is going to be a long time coming, so after a while I tell Margaret that I'd like to try to sleep and lie down on the bed. I managed to sleep until the moment I've been waiting for since I arrived in Thailand finally comes. It begins with a knock on the door and, because I don't move, Margaret goes to answer it. I hear a man's voice, and then Margaret comes over to the bed and, with a hand on my shoulder, gives me a little shake, telling me that there's someone to see me. As I sit up, I see her slip out of the room and I want to call her back, to tell her not to leave me, but he is already walking towards me, so it's too late. My heart is beating so fast, my breathing so shallow that I don't dare look at him until I've managed to compose myself. With my eyes fixed firmly on the ground, it's his shoes I see first. They are made of good leather and are well polished, just as I would expect them to be. He says my name, and, as my eyes travel upwards, I see that while his suit is dark, in keeping with the occasion, it's made of a lightweight fabric because of the climate. My eyes reach his face. It's pleasant, but grave, just as it should be. Mrs. Angel, he says again. Yes? There's a trace of anxiousness in my voice. My name is Alistair Strachan. I'm from the British Embassy." He turns, and I see a young woman standing behind him. And this is Vivian Dashmore. I wonder if we could have a word?" I jump to my feet. "Is it to do with Jack? Have you managed to find him?" "Yes, or rather, the police in England have." Relief floods my face. "Oh, thank goodness for that. Where is he? Why wasn't he answering his phone? Is he on his way here?" "Perhaps we could go and sit down," the young woman suggests. "Of course," I say, ushering them through to the sitting room. I sit down on the sofa, and they take the armchairs. "So where is he?" I ask. "I mean, is he on his way here?" Mr. Strachan clears his throat. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, Mrs. Angel, but I'm afraid that Mr. Angel has been found dead." I stare at him, my eyes wide with shock. Confusion floods my face. I don't understand," I stammer. He shifts uncomfortably. "I'm afraid your husband has been found dead, Mrs. Angel." I shake my head vigorously. "No, he can't be. He's coming here to join me. He said he would. Where is he?" My voice trembles with emotion. "I want to know where he is. Why isn't he here?" "Mrs. Angel, I know this is very difficult for you, but we need to ask you some questions," the young lady says. "Would you like us to fetch someone? Your friend, perhaps?" Yes, I nod. Can you get Margaret, please?" Mr. Strachan goes to the door. I hear the murmur of voices, and Margaret comes in. I see the shock on her face, and I begin shaking uncontrollably. They're saying that Jack's dead," I say. "But he can't be. He can't be." "Oh, it's all right," she murmurs, sitting down next to me and putting her arm round me. "Oh, it's all right." "Perhaps we could have some tea brought up," the young woman says, getting to her feet. She goes over to the phone and speaks to someone in reception. Did he have a car crash?" I ask Margaret, sounding bewildered. Is that what's happened? Did Jack have a car crash on the way to the airport? Is that why he's not here?" I don't know," she says quietly. "He must have," I go on, nodding with conviction. "He must have been rushing to catch the flight. Oh, he must have left the house late and was driving too fast and had a crash. That's what happened, isn't it?" Margaret glances at Mr. Strachan. I don't know, I'm afraid." My teeth begin chattering. "Oh, I'm cold." She jumps to her feet, glad of something to do. "Would you like a jumper? Is there one in your wardrobe?" "Yes, I think so. Not a jumper, a cardigan maybe. The bathrobe? Can I have the bathrobe?" "Yes, of course." She goes into the bathroom, finds the bathrobe, comes back and puts it around my shoulders. "Thank you," I murmur gratefully. "Is that better?" she asks. "Yes, but Jack can't be dead. It must be a mistake. It has to be." She's saved from saying anything by a knock at the door. The young woman opens it, and Mr. Ho comes in, followed by a girl pushing a laden tea trolley. "If I can be of further assistance, please let me know," Mr. Ho says quietly. I sense him looking at me as he leaves the room, but I keep my head bowed. The young woman busies herself with the tea and asks me if I would like sugar. "No, thank you." She places a cup and saucer in front of me, and I pick up the cup, but I'm shaking so much some of the tea slops over the side and onto my hand. Scalded, I clatter the cup back down onto the saucer. "Sorry," I say. Tears fill my eyes. "I'm sorry." "It's all right," says Margaret, hurriedly taking a paper napkin and mopping my hand. I make an effort to pull myself together. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, I say to Mr. Strachan. Alistair Strachan. Mr. Strachan, you say that my husband is dead? I look at him for confirmation. Yes, I'm afraid so. Then can you please tell me how he died? I mean, was it quick? Was anyone else hurt in the accident? Where did it happen? I need to know how it happened. It wasn't a car accident, Mrs. Angel. Not a car accident, I falter. Then how did he die? Mr. Strachan looks uncomfortable. I'm afraid there's no easy way of saying this, Mrs. Angel, but it seems that your husband took his own life. And I burst into tears. Past. Once I'd realised that I could get away with murder, I spent the rest of the night working out the details, thinking of ways to get Jack exactly where I needed him to be when the time came. Because my plan hinged on him losing the Thomasin case, I took a leaf out of his book and planned for every eventuality. I thought very carefully about what I would do if he won, and, in the end, I decided that if he did, I would drug him anyway, and while he was unconscious, phone the police. If I showed them the room in the basement, and the room where he kept me, maybe they would believe what I told them. In the event that I didn't manage to drug him before we left for the airport, I would somehow get the pills into him on the plane and try to get help once we arrived in Thailand. Neither solution was brilliant, but I didn't have any other options. Unless he lost. And even then, there was no guarantee that he would bring up a glass of whiskey to commiserate. The next day, the day of the verdict, I spent the morning crushing the remaining pills into as fine a powder as I possibly could and hid it in a screw of toilet paper, which I pushed into my sleeve, as I would a tissue. When I eventually heard the whir of the black gates opening and the crunch of the gravel as Jack drove up to the front door sometime in the middle of the afternoon, my heart began hammering so hard I was afraid it would burst out of my chest. The time had finally come. Whether he had won or lost, I was going to have to act. He came into the hall, closed the front door and activated the shutters. I heard him open the cloakroom door, walk across the hall to the kitchen, followed by the familiar sounds of the freezer opening and closing, the ice cubes being popped from the tray, the cupboard door opening and closing, the clink as the ice cubes were dropped into one glass. I held my breath. 2 glasses. His footsteps as he came up the stairs were heavy and told me all I needed to know. I began rubbing my left eye furiously so that by the time he unlocked the door it would be red and inflamed. "Well?" I asked. "How did it go?" He held out a glass to me. "We lost." "Lost?" I said, taking it. Without bothering to answer, he raised his glass to his lips and, scared he would knock the whole lot back before I'd had a chance to drug him, I jumped off the bed. "I've had something in my eye all morning," I explained, blinking rapidly. "Could you have a look?" "What?" Could you just look at my eye a moment? I think there must be a fly in there or something." As he peered into my eye, which I kept half shut, I worked the paper holding the powder from my sleeve and into the palm of my hand. "So what happened?" I asked, unscrewing it as best I could with my fingers. "Dina Anderson screwed me over," he said bitterly. "Can you open your eye a bit more?" Keeping my movements small, I moved the glass I was holding in my other hand under the paper and shook the powder into it. "Oh, I can't, it's too painful," I told him, stirring the contents around with my finger. "Can you do it? I'll hold your glass for you." With a sigh of annoyance, he handed me his glass and pulled my eye open using both hands. I can't see anything. If I had a mirror, I'd be able to do it for myself, I grumbled. It doesn't matter. It'll probably work itself out. He held out his hand for his glass, and I gave him mine. What shall we drink to? Revenge, he said grimly. I raised the glass I was holding. To revenge, then. I knocked half of the whiskey back and was gratified to see him doing the same. Nobody makes a fool out of me. Anthony Thomasin is going to suffer for this too. But he was innocent, I protested, wondering how I was going to keep him talking until the pills took effect. What has that got to do with it? As he raised his glass to take another drink, I was alarmed to see tiny white specks floating in the whiskey. Do you know what the best part of my job is? No, what? I said quickly. Sitting opposite all those battered women and imagining it was me who'd beaten them up. He knocked the rest of his glass back. And the photos, all those lovely photos of the injuries. I suppose you could call it one of the perks of the job. Incensed, I raised my glass, and before I could stop myself, I had thrown the rest of my whiskey in his face. His roar of anger, plus the knowledge that I'd acted too soon, almost paralysed me, but as he lunged towards me, his eyes shut tight against the sting of the whiskey, I took advantage of his momentary blindness and pushed him as hard as I could. As he stumbled awkwardly against the bed, the few seconds before he righted himself were all that I needed. Slamming the door behind me, I ran down the stairs to the hall below, looking urgently for somewhere to hide, because I couldn't let him catch me. Not just yet. Upstairs, the door crashed back against the wall, and as he came pounding down the stairs, I headed for the cloakroom and climbed into the wardrobe, hoping to buy myself a few precious minutes. This time, there was no sing-song in his voice as he called for me. Instead, he roared my name, promising such harm to me that I trembled from my hiding place behind the coats. Several minutes passed, and I imagined him in the sitting room, checking behind every piece of furniture. The waiting was unbearable, but I knew that with every minute that passed, the chances of the pills taking effect increased. At last, I heard the unmistakable sound of his footsteps coming down the hall. My legs turned to jelly, and as the cloakroom door opened, I found myself sliding to the floor. The silence that followed was terrifying. I knew he was there, outside the wardrobe, and I knew he knew I was inside. But he seemed content to leave me to sweat, relishing, no doubt, in the fear emanating from every pore of my body. I don't know when it occurred to me that the wardrobe might have a key, but the thought that at any moment he could turn it in the lock and imprison me there made it impossible for me to breathe. If I couldn't put the next part of my plan into action, there would be no saving Millie. Blind with panic, I flung myself against the doors. They burst open, and I fell into a crumpled heap at Jack's feet. His rage, as he pulled me up by the hair, was tangible, and afraid that he might harm me physically, I began screaming for mercy, telling him I was sorry and begging him not to take me down to the basement, gabbling incoherently that I would do anything as long as he didn't lock me in there. The mention of the basement had the desired effect. As he dragged me back along the hall, I struggled so hard that he had no choice but to pick me up, and I let myself go limp so he would think I'd given up. I used the time it took for him to carry me to the room he had prepared so carefully for Millie to focus on what I needed to do, so that when he tried to throw me down, I held on to him as hard as I could. Enraged, he tried to shake me off, and as he cursed me loudly, the slur in his voice was all that I needed. Still keeping hold of him, I allowed myself to slide down his body towards the floor, and when I reached his knees, I yanked them towards me as hard as I could. His legs buckled immediately, and as he swayed above me, I used every ounce of strength I possessed to send him crashing to the floor. Stunned by the fall, his body heavy from the pills, he lay without moving for a few precious seconds, and before he could recover, I fled the room, slamming the door behind me. As I ran towards the stairs, I could hear him hammering on the door, yelling at me to let him out, and the fury in his voice made me start sobbing with fright. Reaching the hall, I kicked the door that led to the basement with my foot, shutting it against the noise. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I ran to my bedroom, retrieved the glasses from where we had thrown them, and carried them down to the kitchen, trying to ignore Jack's desperate attempts to get out of the room below by focusing on what I needed to do. With shaking hands, I washed the glasses, dried them carefully, and put them back in the cupboard. Hurrying back upstairs, I went to my bedroom, straightened the bed, removed the shampoo, sliver of soap and towel from the bathroom, and carried them into Jack's bathroom. Stripping off my pyjamas, I put them in the laundry basket, went into the bedroom where my clothes were kept, and got dressed quickly. I opened the wardrobe and took a couple of pairs of shoes from their boxes, some underwear and a dress, went back to the master bedroom and placed them around the room. On returning to the dressing room, I picked up the case that Jack had made me pack the night before and went downstairs. I wasn't worried about getting out of the house. I didn't need a key to open the front door. But I was worried about how I was going to get to the airport without any money. I knew that Jack had probably hung the jacket he had worn that morning in the cloakroom, but I didn't want to rifle through his clothes for money and hoped I would come across some while I was looking for my passport and tickets. I opened the door of his study and turned on the light. When I saw both passports and tickets lying neatly on his desk, I almost cried with relief. There was an envelope beside them, and, opening it, I found some baht. With the sleeve of my cardigan over my fingers, I slid open one of the drawers, but I couldn't find any money, and I didn't dare rifle through the other drawers. Taking my ticket, passport, and the baht with me, I went back into the hall, and because I couldn't get to the airport without money, I went into the cloakroom, found his jacket, opened his wallet as carefully as I could, and took out 4 £50 notes. I was about to close his wallet when his business cards caught my eye, and, remembering that at some point I would need to phone his office, I took one. Realizing that I had no idea what the time was, I went back to the kitchen and looked at the clock on the microwave. I was alarmed to see that it was already 4:30, around the time I would need to leave for the airport on a Friday night for a check-in at 7. In all my careful planning, I hadn't actually thought about how I would get to the airport. I suppose I'd had a vague idea of taking a taxi, so it was galling to realize that I had no idea what number I should call to order one. Public transport was out. The nearest train station was a 15-minute walk away, and I was loath to draw attention to myself by wheeling a heavy case along the road, and anyway, I doubted it would get me there in time. Aware that I was wasting precious time, I went back to the hall and picked up the phone, wondering if such a thing as an operator still existed. As I stood there, wondering what number I should dial, Esther's came into my head, and, hardly daring to believe that I had remembered it correctly, I called her, praying that she would pick up. "Hello?" I took a deep breath. "Esther, it's Grace. Am I disturbing you?" "No, not at all. I was just listening to the radio, actually. Apparently Anthony Thomasin was acquitted." She paused a moment, as if she wasn't quite sure what to say. "I guess Jack must be disappointed." My mind raced. "Yes, I'm afraid he is rather." "Are you all right, Grace? You sound a bit upset." "It's Jack," I admitted. He says he can't leave for Thailand tonight as he has too much paperwork to do. When he booked the tickets, he thought the case would be over long before now, but because of the new evidence about Dina Anderson having a lover, it overran. Oh, you must be so disappointed. But you can always go later, can't you? That's just it. Jack wants me to go tonight, as planned, and says he'll join me on Tuesday once he's got everything sorted out. I've told him that I'd rather wait for him, but he says it's stupid to waste both tickets. He'll have to buy a new one for Tuesday, you see. Ah, I take it you don't want to go without him? No, of course I don't. I give a shaky laugh. But in the mood he's in, maybe it would be better. I'm meant to be phoning for a taxi to take me to the airport. He can't take me because he had a hefty whiskey when he came in. Trouble is, I don't have a number for one, and I don't dare disturb Jack in his study and ask him if I can use the computer to look for one. So I was wondering if you knew of a local firm. Would you want me to take you? The children are already home from school, and Rufus worked from home today, so it wouldn't be a problem. It was the last thing I wanted. Oh, it's very kind of you, but I can't ask you to drive to the airport on a Friday night, I said hastily. Well, I don't think it'll be that easy to get a taxi at such short notice. What time do you need to leave? Well, as soon as possible, really, I admitted reluctantly. I have to check in at 7. Oh, then you'd better let me take you. I'd rather take a taxi. If you could just give me a number. Look, I'll take you. Really isn't any trouble. Anyway, get me out of the dreaded bath time. No, it's fine. Why won't you let me help you, Grace? There was something about the way she said it that put me on my guard. I just think it's an awful imposition, that's all. It isn't. Her voice was firm. Have you got all your stuff ready? Yes, we packed yesterday. Then I'll just go and tell Rufus I'm taking you to the airport, and I'll be straight over. Say, 15 minutes? Great, I told her. Thank you, Esther. I'll tell Jack. I put the phone down, appalled at what I'd just agreed to. I couldn't even begin to imagine how I was going to be able to pretend to someone like Esther that everything was all right. Present. The air hostess leans towards me. We'll be arriving at Heathrow in about 40 minutes, she says quietly. Thank you. I feel a sudden urge of panic and force myself to breathe calmly, because I can't afford to crack at this stage of the game. But the fact is, even though I've thought about nothing else since Margaret saw me through passport control at the airport in Bangkok, almost 12 hours ago, I still have no idea how I'm going to play it when we finally land. Diane and Adam will be there to meet me and take me back to theirs, so I need to think very carefully about what I'm going to say to them about my last hours with Jack, because whatever I tell them, I'll have to repeat to the police. The seatbelt sign comes on, and we begin our descent into Heathrow. I close my eyes and pray that I'll end up saying the right thing to Diane and Adam, especially as it's Adam who's been liaising with the police since Jack's body was found. I hope there aren't going to be any nasty surprises. I hope Adam isn't going to tell me that the police think Jack's death is suspicious. If he does, I don't know what I'll say. All I can do is play it by ear. The problem is, there are so many things I don't know. The euphoria I felt when Mr. Strachan told me that Jack had taken his own life, because it meant that my plan had worked, and I had got away with murder, was quickly tempered by the fact that he'd used the word seems. I didn't know whether he'd decided to be cautious of his own bat, or if the police in England had intimated that there was room for doubt. If they had already started questioning people, work colleagues, friends, maybe they'd come to the conclusion that Jack was an unlikely candidate for suicide. The police were bound to ask me if I knew why Jack had taken his own life, and I would have to convince them that losing his first court case was reason enough. Maybe they would ask me if there'd been problems in our marriage. But if I admitted that there had been, even if I gave them all the details, they would surely consider murder rather than suicide. And that is something I can't risk. Mr. Strachan told me that Jack had died from an overdose, but he didn't give me any more details, so I don't know where his body was actually found, and I hadn't thought it appropriate to ask. But what if Jack had a way of getting out of the room in the basement? What if there was a switch hidden away somewhere that I hadn't found? What if, before actually succumbing, he'd made it up the stairs and into the hall? He might even have had time to write a note implicating me before he died. Not knowing means I'm ill-prepared for what's to come. Even if all went to plan and Jack was found in the basement, the police are bound to ask me why the room existed, what its purpose was, and I can't work out if it'll be in my interest to admit that I knew about it all along, or deny all knowledge of it. If I admit that I knew about it, I'll have to make up some story about it being the place Jack used to go to before he went to court, to psych himself up, and remind himself of the worthy work he did as defender of battered wives. I'd rather deny all knowledge of it, and profess shock that such a room could exist in our beautiful house. After all, as it was hidden away at the back of the basement, it's feasible that I hadn't known about it. But then I'm faced with another dilemma. If, for some reason, the police have fingerprinted the room, they might have found traces of my presence there. So maybe it would be better to tell the truth, but not the whole truth. Because if I portray Jack as anything other than the loving husband everybody thought he was, if I told them the real purpose of the room, they might begin to wonder if I murdered him to protect Millie. And maybe a court would be sympathetic. Or maybe they would make me out to be some kind of gold digger who'd killed my relatively new husband for his money. As we begin our descent into Heathrow, the importance of making the right decisions, of saying the right thing, weighs me down. It takes a while to get through passport control. As I go through the double doors, I scan the faces of people waiting, searching for the familiar faces of Adam and Diane. I'm so tense that I know I'll probably burst into tears of relief when I see them, which will be in keeping with my role as a bereaved wife. But when I see Esther waving at me rather than Diane, a feeling of dread comes over me. "I hope you don't mind," she says, giving me a hug. "I didn't have anything to do today, so I offered to pick you up and take you to Diane's. I'm so sorry about Jack." I still can't believe it, I add, shaking my head in bewilderment, because the shock of seeing her waiting for me has dried up the tears I'd been hoping to shed. I still can't believe he's dead. "It must have been such a shock for you," she agrees, taking my case from me. "Come on, let's find a cafe. I thought we'd go for a coffee before we start on the journey home." My heart sinks even further, because it's going to be so much harder to play the grieving widow in front of her rather than Diane. "Wouldn't it be better to go straight back to Diane's? I'd like to speak to Adam, and I need to get down the police station. Adam says the detective looking after the case wants to talk to me." "We'll only get stuck in rush hour at this time of the morning, so we may as well have a coffee," she says, heading towards the restaurant area. We find a cafe, and she makes a beeline for a table in the middle of the room where we're surrounded by noisy school children. "Sit down, I'll go and get the coffees. I won't be long." My instinct is to flee, but I know that I can't. If Esther has come to pick me up at the airport, if she has suggested coffee, it's because she wants to talk to me. I try not to panic, but it's hard. What if she's guessed that I murdered Jack? What if there was something about my behaviour the day she drove me to the airport that aroused her suspicions? Is she going to tell me that she knows what I've done? Is she going to threaten to tell the police? Is she going to blackmail me? I watch her paying for our coffees, and as she heads back to where I'm waiting, I feel sick with nerves. She sits down opposite me and places my coffee in front of me. Thank you. I give her a watery smile. Grace, how much do you know about Jack's death? She asks, opening her sachet of sugar and tipping it into her cup. What do you mean? I stammer. I presume you know how he died? Yes, he took an overdose. He did, she agrees, but that's not what killed him. I don't understand. It seems that he misjudged the amount of pills he would need and didn't take enough. So he didn't die, well, not from the overdose anyway. I shake my head. I don't follow. Well, because he didn't take enough pills to kill himself, he regained consciousness. So, how did he die then? From dehydration. I summon a look of shock to my face. Dehydration? Yes, about 4 days after he took the overdose. But if he wasn't dead, if he was still alive, why didn't he just go and get a drink of water if he needed one? Because he couldn't. His body wasn't found in the main part of the house, you see. It was found in a room in the basement. A room in the basement? Yes. The worst thing is, it couldn't be opened from the inside, which meant he couldn't get out, even when thirst took hold. She picks up her spoon and stirs her coffee. Seems he tried to, though. Poor Jack, I say quietly. Poor Jack. I can't bear to think about how he must have suffered. Did you have any inkling that he would do such a thing? No, not at all. I would never have left him otherwise. I would never have gone to Thailand if I thought he was going to kill himself. So, how was he when he came back from court? Well, he was disappointed about losing the case, of course. It just seems that it seems completely out of character for him to take his own life. At least, that's what people might think. So he was probably a bit more than disappointed, don't you think? I mean, wasn't it the first case he'd lost? Yes, it was. So he must have been devastated. Maybe he even told you that he felt his career was over. That you thought it was just something he'd said in the heat of the moment, so you didn't really take any notice. I stare at her. Isn't that what he said, Grace? Didn't he say that he thought his career was over? Yes. I nod slowly. He did say that. So that must be why he wanted to kill himself. Because he couldn't stand failure. It must have been. I agree. It also explains why he was so eager for you to leave. He wanted you out of the way so that he could take the pills. It seems that he took them not long after you left. Do you know where he got them from? I mean, does he sometimes take sleeping pills? Sometimes. I improvise. They weren't prescribed by a doctor or anything. He just bought them over the counter. They were the same ones that Millie was taking. I remember him asking Mrs. Goodrich for the name of them. The fact that he knew the door to the room in the basement couldn't be opened from the inside shows that he realised he might not have enough pills but was determined to kill himself, she says. She takes a sip of her coffee. The police will almost certainly ask you about the room. You knew about it, didn't you? Because Jack showed it to you? Yes. She fiddles with her spoon. They'll also want to know what the room was for. For the first time, she seems unsure of herself. It seems that it was painted red, even the floor and ceiling, and that the walls were hung with paintings of women who'd been brutally beaten. I hear the disbelief in her voice, and I wait. I wait for her to tell me what I should say to the police. But she doesn't, because she has no explanation to offer me, and the silence stretches out between us. So, I tell her what I came up with on the plane. Jack used the room as a kind of annex, I say. He showed it to me not long after we moved into the house. He said he found it useful to spend time there before he went to court, going through the files, looking at the photographic evidence. He said it took such an emotional toll on him that he found it difficult to prepare mentally in the house, which was why he had created a separate study in the basement. She nods approvingly. And the paintings? I feel a surge of panic. I'd forgotten all about the portraits Jack had forced me to paint for him. Esther looks steadily at me, forcing me to focus. I didn't see any paintings. Jack must have hung them later. I suppose he didn't show them to you because they were so graphic he didn't want to distress you. Probably, I agree. Jack was wonderfully caring that way. They might ask you if you knew the door couldn't be opened from the inside. No, I only went down there once, so it wasn't something I would have noticed. I look at her across the table, needing confirmation that it would be the right thing to say. Don't worry, Grace. The police are going to go easy on you. Remember, Jack told them you were mentally fragile, so they know they have to be careful. She pauses. Perhaps you should play on that a little. How do you know all this? About how Jack died, where his body was found, the portraits, what the police are going to ask me? Adam told me. It's going to be all over the papers tomorrow, so he thought you should be prepared. She pauses a moment. He wanted to tell you himself, but I told him that, as you and I were the last people to see Jack alive, I felt it should be me who came to get you at the airport. I stare at her. The last people to see Jack alive? I falter. Yes, you know last Friday when I picked you up to take you to the airport. He waved goodbye to us after we'd put your case in the boot. He was at the study window, wasn't he? Yes, I said slowly. He was. And, if I remember rightly, you told me that he didn't come out to the gate to wait with you because he wanted to get straight down to work. But what I can't remember is whether he was wearing his jacket or not. No, he wasn't. He wasn't wearing his tie either. He'd taken it off when he came back from court. He waved us goodbye, and then he blew you a kiss. Yes, he did. The enormity of what she's doing, of what she's offering to do, hits me, and I feel myself starting to shake. Thank you, I whisper. She reaches across the table and covers my hands with hers. It'll be all right, Grace. I promise. Tears well up from deep inside me. I don't understand. Did Millie say something to you? I mumble, aware that even if she had, even if Millie had told Esther that Jack had pushed her down the stairs, it wouldn't be reason enough for her to lie for me. Only that she didn't like George Clooney. She smiles. I look at her in bewilderment. Then why? She looks steadily back at me. What colour was Millie's room, Grace? I can barely get the word out. Red, I tell her, my voice breaking. Millie's room was red. That's what I thought, she says softly. The end. You've been listening to Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Pärï, narrated by Georgia Maguire.
Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program.